Hello, my friend, and welcome. Tonight, let your body sink into the softness beneath you, let your eyes grow heavy, and let your breathing slow, because tonight we are not going anywhere fast. Tonight we are drifting, gently, backward through the centuries, into a warm and lantern-lit world where the streets smell of ink and cardamom, and the rivers carry the reflections of 1,000 small clay lamps. This is the story of the Islamic Golden Age, and we will tell it slowly, chapter by chapter, night by night, until the whole long tale has been whispered into the dark. There is no need to remember anything. There is no need to stay awake. Just listen and let the words carry you away like a boat on a slow, dark river. Chapter 1. The Quiet Before the Dawn. Long ago, before the great libraries were built, before the round city of Baghdad rose from the flat earth beside the Tigris, the world was already old and already full of stories. In the deserts of Arabia, the wind moved over sand that had watched empires rise and crumble, watched caravans cross from the spice ports of the south to the stone cities of the north, watched the stars wheel overhead in patterns that the Bedouin knew by heart. Using them to navigate the trackless dark the way a sleepy mind learns to navigate the soft trackless dark of a dream. In the 7th century, in the town of Mecca, a merchant named Mohammed began to receive, in moments of trembling stillness, words that he said came from God. Slowly, quietly, the way a single candle can eventually light a whole room, these words spread. They spoke of one God of mercy, of charity, of the duty to care for the orphan and the traveler and the poor. They spoke of a community bound not by blood but by belief, and this was something new under the desert sun. Let your shoulders relax as I tell you this, because none of it needs to be studied tonight, only felt, only heard, the way a lullaby is heard by a child who does not yet understand the words but understands the warmth. Within a single human lifetime, this new faith called Islam had spread across the Arabian Peninsula. Muhammad passed away in the year 632, and in the quiet grief that followed, his followers had to decide who would lead them. They called this leader a caliph, meaning successor, and the first caliphs, men who had known the Prophet personally, guided the young community through its early, uncertain years. Abu Bakr, then Umar, then Uthman, then Ali. Say their names softly to yourself, like counting sheep, like counting the slow rise and fall of your own chest as you breathe in and breathe out. Under these early caliphs, something remarkable happened, something that historians still marvel at today. Armies rode out from Arabia, not vast armies, not overwhelming in number, but fast, disciplined, and driven by a conviction that felt to them unstoppable. Within a few decades, they had swept through Syria, through Egypt, through Persia, through the crumbling edges of two exhausted old empires, the Byzantines to the west and the Sassanid Persians to the east. Both of these empires had spent generations fighting each other, bleeding each other slowly, like two old rivers wearing away at the same stone. And when the new Arab armies arrived, tired soldiers and tired treasuries could not hold the line. But conquest, my friend, is only ever the noisy beginning of a story. It is the loud knock on the door late at night. What matters more, what this whole long tale is really about, is what happened after the armies passed through, after the noise quieted down, after the dust settled over the new borders. Because in the captured cities, something unexpected began to bloom. The new Muslim rulers did not, for the most part, tear down what they found. They inherited Greek medical texts in the old libraries of Alexandria and Antioch. They inherited Persian systems of governance and irrigation, refined over 1,000 years of trial and error. They inherited Indian mathematics, carried along the trade routes from the far side of the world. And rather than discard these treasures, the new rulers began, slowly, patiently, the way a sleepy hand slowly turns the page of a very old book to gather them in. Let me tell you about Damascus, because Damascus is where our story pauses to rest for a moment before moving onward. After the turbulence of the early caliphates, a dynasty called the Umayyads rose to power in the year 661, and they made Damascus, an ancient city already thousands of years old, the capital of a new and enormous empire. Picture it with me now, in the dim light behind your closed eyes. Picture the great mosque of Damascus, its courtyard paved in pale stone, warmed by the sun, its walls covered in mosaics of gold and green glass depicting rivers and trees, an image, some say, of paradise itself, shimmering gently whenever the light moved across it. Picture merchants unrolling bolts of silk in the covered markets, the soft murmur of a dozen languages blending together in the shaded alleys, the smell of bread rising from clay ovens tucked into the sides of ordinary homes. The Umayyad caliphs ruled an empire that stretched, at its greatest extent, from the Iberian Peninsula in the far west, what is now Spain and Portugal, all the way to the edges of India in the east. It was, in terms of size, one of the largest empires the world had yet seen, larger even than Rome at its height. And yet, my friend, empires built quickly on the strength of conquest alone often find that holding together is a slower, gentler art than winning territory, an art of patience rather than of speed. The Umayyads, for all their grandeur, ruled largely as an Arab aristocracy, favoring Arab Muslims over the many newly converted peoples, Persians, Egyptians, Berbers, who found themselves treated as lesser citizens within their own homelands. This quiet unfairness simmered for decades, like a pot left too long at the back of a stove, and eventually, inevitably, it began to boil over. In the deserts and river valleys of Persia, a movement began to gather, quietly at first, whispered between trusted friends in the dark. The way secrets are always first shared in the dark. This movement rallied around the descendants of the Prophet's uncle, a man named Abbas, and so they came to be called the Abbasids. Their rebellion swept out of the eastern province of Khurasan in the year 747, gathering strength as it moved westward, promising a more just order, one that did not divide the faithful into first- and second-class citizens based on ancestry. By the year 750, the Abbasid revolution had succeeded. The last Umayyad caliph was defeated, and in a final, almost fairy tale twist, one young Umayyad prince, named Abd al-Rahman, escaped the slaughter of his family, fled across the breadth of North Africa, a journey of astonishing danger and endurance, and eventually crossed into Spain, where he founded a new Umayyad kingdom that would flourish independently for centuries. We will return to his story later, to the glittering courts of Cordoba that his descendants built. But for now, let him ride quietly into the western distance, a lone survivor carrying an old name into a new land, while our story remains in the east, in the heartlands of the new Abbasid Caliphate. And it is here, my friend, in the earliest years of Abbasid rule, that our story truly begins to glow, the way embers begin to glow warm and orange as a fire settles for the night. The second Abbasid caliph, a man named al-Mansur, decided that Damascus, with all its Umayyad associations, was not the right home for this new dynasty. He wanted a fresh capital, built from nothing, positioned at the crossroads of the world. And so, in the year 762, on the banks of the Tigris River, in a spot where the land was fertile and the trade routes converged from every direction, he began to build a city unlike any other. He called it Madinat al-Salam, the City of Peace, though history would remember it by the name of a small village that had once stood nearby, a name that would echo through the coming centuries as a byword for wealth, wisdom, and wonder. He called it Baghdad. Rest now for a moment, my friend, here at the edge of this new city, still just a plan of concentric circles drawn in the dust by royal architects, still just an idea waiting to rise from the riverbank. In the next chapter, we will walk through its gates as they are built. We will watch its round walls rise course by course, and we will begin to understand why this single city would become the beating heart of the entire medieval world, drawing scholars, poets, merchants, and dreamers from every corner of the earth. But that is for the next telling. For now, let the picture of the round city, still unfinished, still glowing faintly in the light of a setting sun over the Tigris, be the last thing in your mind. Rest, my friend, rest, and I will see you again soon, when the story continues. Chapter 2: The Round City by the River. Welcome back, my friend. Settle in again, let your head sink into the pillow, and let the last traces of the day drift away from you like smoke rising from a dying fire. Tonight, we return to the banks of the Tigris, to the year 762, where the Caliph Al-Mansur stood upon the riverbank with his astrologers and his engineers, watching the stars, waiting for the precise, favorable moment to break the ground. He was, by all accounts, a careful and thoughtful man, not given to hasty decisions, and he wanted his new capital to be more than just a fortress. He wanted it to be a symbol, round and perfect, like a full moon resting upon the earth. And so the city rose in circles. 3 great walls, one within the other, each higher than the last, formed rings around a central palace and a great mosque, positioned like a pearl at the very heart of a slowly closing hand. 4 gates pierced the outer wall, each one facing a different corner of the empire: the Kufa gate facing south toward Arabia, the Basra gate facing the trade routes of the Gulf, the Khurasan gate facing east toward Persia and the mountains beyond, and the Syrian gate facing west toward Damascus and the Mediterranean world. If you close your eyes, you can imagine standing at the center of that innermost circle, turning slowly in place, and understanding that no matter which direction you looked, a road led outward to a different corner of the known world. Baghdad was not built at the edge of anything. It was built at the middle of everything. The construction took years, and it drew upon the labor and the skill of thinkers and workers from every province of the empire. Persian architects brought with them centuries of experience in building for the harsh climate of the plains, using thick walls and covered courtyards to keep interiors cool even beneath a punishing summer sun. Brickmakers baked mud from the riverbanks into the pale, sun-colored bricks that would come to define the city's low, warm skyline. Canals were dug to bring water in from the Tigris and Euphrates, feeding into a broader network that had, in truth, existed in that fertile plain for thousands of years already, back through Babylon, back through Sumer, back to the very first cities that human beings ever built. Baghdad did not rise from empty desert. It rose from soil that had already cradled the beginnings of writing, of law, of mathematics, long before the word Islam had ever been spoken. And now, one more great city was rising there, drawing on all that had come before. Within a generation, Baghdad had outgrown its own walls. What had been planned as a modest administrative capital exploded into one of the largest cities on Earth, with some estimates suggesting a population approaching 1 million people by the early 9th century, at a time when the largest cities of Western Europe held only a few tens of thousands. Let that number settle over you like a warm blanket. 1 million lives, 1 million small stories, merchants and midwives, bakers and blacksmiths, poets reciting verses in the shade of courtyard fig trees, children chasing one another through markets stacked with melons and dates and bolts of dyed cloth from as far away as China. Trade flowed into Baghdad from every direction, carried by camel caravan across the deserts and by ship along the rivers and out into the Gulf, connecting the city to India, to China, to East Africa, to the Baltic lands in the far north where furs and amber were traded down through Russia in exchange for Abbasid silver coins, coins that archaeologists still find today buried in Scandinavian soil, a quiet, glittering testament to how far the reach of this city truly extended. Paper, a craft learned from Chinese prisoners after a battle far to the east near the Talas River in the year 751, began to be manufactured in Baghdad and other cities of the Caliphate. And this single technology, humble as it sounds, would prove to be one of the great hidden engines of everything that was about to happen. Because paper was cheap, and paper was plentiful, and cheap, plentiful paper meant that, for the first time in human history, knowledge itself could be copied, shared, and spread on a scale that the ancient world, writing on expensive parchment or fragile papyrus, had never been able to achieve. The caliphs who followed Al-Mansur understood, some more than others, that a great capital needed to be not only a center of trade and governance, but a center of learning. And of these caliphs, one name shines more brightly than the rest in the soft candlelight of memory, a name wrapped in centuries of legend and poetry. Harun al-Rashid, the fifth Abbasid caliph, who ruled from 786 to 809, at the very height of Baghdad's early glory. You may have heard his name before without quite knowing why, my friend, because Harun al-Rashid became, centuries later, a character in the story collection known as the 1001 Nights, wandering the streets of Baghdad in disguise at night to see how his people truly lived. The real Harun al-Rashid was, of course, a more complicated man than any legend can capture, a ruler who could be generous and cultured one day and ruthless in matters of political survival the next, as most rulers of that era were. But it is true that under his reign, Baghdad blossomed. He corresponded, it is said, with Charlemagne, the great emperor of the Franks far away in Western Europe, and sent him gifts that included, among other wonders, a water clock so intricate, marking the hours with mechanical birds and chiming bells, that Charlemagne's court reportedly believed it must contain some kind of hidden magic, unable to imagine the mechanical ingenuity that Baghdad's craftsmen had already mastered. Harun al-Rashid's wife, Zubaydah, is remembered for a different kind of gift, one no less remarkable. Concerned for the safety and comfort of pilgrims traveling the long, dry road from Iraq to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, she funded the construction of wells, reservoirs, and rest stations along the entire pilgrimage route, a road that came to be called Darb Zubaydah, the Road of Zubaydah, in her honor. Imagine, my friend, walking for days across scorching, empty land and coming, again and again, upon a cool stone well built by the quiet generosity of a queen who never met you and never would, yet thought of your thirst centuries in advance. There is something deeply moving in that, something worth carrying gently into your dreams tonight. But of everything that flourished during this golden noon of Baghdad's history, one institution above all others would come to define the age, would become the beating heart within the beating heart of the city. It was called, in Arabic, Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Rest here again for a moment, my friend. Let the picture of Baghdad settle in your mind, its round walls glowing amber in the evening light, its markets slowly quieting as merchants close their stalls, its scholars lighting oil lamps in courtyards where the night is just beginning to cool the air after a hot day. In the next chapter, we will step through the doors of the House of Wisdom itself, and we will meet the translators, the mathematicians, and the astronomers who gathered there, hunting through old Greek scrolls and Persian manuscripts as if they were treasure hunters, digging up wisdom instead of gold. But that is a story for our next telling. For now, simply rest and let Baghdad glow softly behind your closed eyes, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 3: The House of Wisdom. Hello again, my friend. I am glad you have returned. Let your body settle once more, heavy and warm, into the place where you are resting, and let your mind drift back to Baghdad, to a particular courtyard within the palace complex, shaded by trees, cooled by a fountain whose water trickles so softly that it sounds almost like a voice, murmuring old secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. This is the House of Wisdom, and tonight we will wander its halls together. The House of Wisdom began, most historians believe, as a more modest institution, perhaps a royal library established under Al-Mansur or his successors, a quiet repository for administrative documents, and a growing collection of manuscripts gathered from across the empire. But under the Caliph Al-Ma'mun, who ruled from 813 to 833, this institution blossomed into something far larger and far more ambitious, a true center for the translation, study, and expansion of human knowledge, drawing scholars regardless of their faith, their ethnicity, or their birthplace, so long as they had something valuable to contribute. Al-Ma'mun, it is said, was inspired in part by a dream, in which the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle appeared to him and spoke with him about the nature of goodness and reason. Whether or not that story is entirely true, or simply a legend grown up around a caliph who genuinely loved philosophy, what is certain is that Al-Mamun poured extraordinary resources into the pursuit of translated knowledge. He is said to have sent emissaries to Constantinople, to the heart of the Byzantine Empire, to negotiate for copies of Greek manuscripts, exchanging them, according to some accounts, for their weight in gold. Picture that for a moment, my friend, if you can, without letting it wake you further. Only let it glow warmly in your imagination. Scales balanced on one side with a heavy, dusty scroll of Greek philosophy, and on the other side, gold poured slowly, coin by coin, until the two sides balanced. That is how much this civilization believed old knowledge was worth. Into the house of wisdom came the works of Aristotle and Plato, of Euclid and Ptolemy, of Galen and Hippocrates, texts on logic, geometry, astronomy, and medicine that had been preserved, sometimes only barely, in Greek-speaking communities in Syria, in Egypt, in Byzantium. And there they were met by an extraordinary generation of translators, many of them Christian and Jewish scholars fluent in Greek, Syriac, Persian, and Arabic, who worked patiently, sentence by sentence, to render these ancient ideas into the Arabic language, which was rapidly becoming the great shared scholarly language of an enormous, diverse civilization stretching from Spain to Central Asia. One name deserves special mention here, and you may let it settle into your memory softly, the way a smooth stone settles at the bottom of a quiet pond. Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Christian physician and scholar born in southern Iraq, became perhaps the greatest translator of the entire age. He did not simply translate word for word, a crude and often inaccurate method, but instead worked to fully understand the meaning of a text in its original language before rendering it into clear, precise Arabic, often producing multiple drafts and comparing manuscripts from different sources to correct errors that had crept in over centuries of copying. He is said to have traveled great distances simply to track down a better copy of a single medical text. His translations of Galen's medical works would go on to shape medical education for centuries, not only across the Islamic world but eventually, much later, back in Europe as well, when these Arabic translations were themselves translated once more, this time into Latin. Do you see the shape of it, my friend? The strange and beautiful loop of it. Greek knowledge, gathered and preserved in Baghdad, translated into Arabic, expanded upon, corrected, and improved by generations of scholars, and centuries later, carried back westward into Europe, where it would help kindle the fires of the European Renaissance. Nothing in this story stands alone. Everything is passed hand to hand, mind to mind, across centuries and across faiths, like a lantern carried through a long, dark night, handed from one traveler to the next so that the flame never goes out. The House of Wisdom was not only a place of translation, though. It became a gathering point for original research as well, a place where scholars did not merely preserve old knowledge but built entirely new towers upon its foundation. And it is here, in this next resting point of our story, that we begin to meet the individual thinkers, the mathematicians and astronomers and physicians, whose names would echo for 1,000 years afterward. But we will save their stories, their patient, curious, lantern-lit lives, for our next chapter. For now, let your breathing slow again, my friend. Picture the courtyard of the House of Wisdom, its fountain still murmuring, its shelves lined with manuscripts in a dozen languages, its scholars bent over their desks by lamplight, utterly absorbed, utterly at peace in their work. Let that peace settle into you now. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 4: The Man Who Gave Us Algebra. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, let us walk once more through the quiet halls of the House of Wisdom, past the shelves of translated manuscripts, toward a small room where a single scholar sits surrounded by scraps of parchment covered in numbers and diagrams, utterly lost in thought. His name is Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, and though he lived and worked in the early 9th century, His name would echo through mathematics classrooms for the next 1,200 years, whispered by students who often have no idea just how old the ideas they are learning truly are. Al-Khwarizmi was born, most historians believe, in the region of Khwarizm, south of the Aral Sea, though he made his career in Baghdad under the patronage of the Caliph Al-Ma'mun. He worked at the House of Wisdom as an astronomer and geographer as well as a mathematician, but it is his mathematical writing that would prove most transformative. In a work titled, in Arabic, Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal Muqabala, or in English, the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing, Al-Khwarizmi laid out systematic methods for solving linear and quadratic equations, methods that did not rely on the geometric proofs the Greeks had favored, but instead used a clear, step-by-step arithmetic approach that could be taught, learned, and applied by merchants, surveyors, and engineers. Not only by philosophers. The word al-Jabr, meaning restoration or completion, referring to the process of moving a negative term from one side of an equation to the other to make it positive, is the very word from which our modern term algebra descends. Let that settle over you gently, my friend, the way a warm blanket settles over tired shoulders. Every time a student today writes the word algebra at the top of a homework page, they are, without realizing it, speaking a fragment of Arabic, a small linguistic fossil carried forward from a quiet room in 9th century Baghdad. Al-Khwarizmi's influence did not stop there. He also wrote an important treatise on the Hindu numeral system, the very numerals, 0 through 9, that had originated in India and that we still use today. His work helped popularize this system throughout the Islamic world, and centuries later, when his writings were translated into Latin in medieval Europe, this numeral system came to be known throughout the West as Arabic numerals, a name that has stuck ever since, even though the numerals themselves trace their deepest roots to Indian mathematicians centuries earlier. And here again, my friend, notice the pattern, the gentle relay race of knowledge from India through the Islamic world into Europe, each civilization adding its own understanding, its own refinements before passing the torch onward. Indeed, the very word algorithm, so central to our modern digital world, to every computer program and every phone application you have ever used, descends from a Latinized version of Al-Khwarizmi's own name, algorithmi. Somewhere in every smartphone, in every line of computer code quietly running in the background of modern life, there lingers a small, invisible echo of a mathematician working by lamplight in 9th century Baghdad, a man who never could have imagined the world his careful arithmetic would eventually help to build. Al-Khwarizmi's 0 deserves a special, quiet pause of its own here, my friend, because the concept of 0 as a true number, not merely an absence but a value in its own right, was one of the most profound intellectual leaps in the history of mathematics. Ancient Greek and Roman mathematics struggled with this idea. But scholars working within the Islamic world, drawing on and refining Indian concepts, embraced 0 fully, using it as a placeholder and as a number, enabling the positional decimal system that makes modern arithmetic, modern engineering, modern finance, and modern computing all possible. Every time you see a 0, my friend, in a phone number, in a price tag, in a clock reading midnight, you are looking at an idea that had to be discovered, argued over, and patiently proven useful before it could become the invisible, taken for granted tool that it is today. Let us drift gently onward now, past Al-Khwarizmi's small lamplit room, deeper into the House of Wisdom, where other mathematicians built upon his foundations. The brothers known as the Banu Musa, 3 siblings born to a former astrologer to Al-Ma'mun, financed and conducted research into geometry and mechanics, writing an influential treatise on the measurement of plane and spherical figures. Later scholars, such as Al-Khariji, would extend algebraic methods further, working with polynomials and beginning to develop what we would today recognize as early algebraic notation. Others, like Thabit ibn Qurra, a Sabian scholar from Haran fluent in Greek, Syriac, and Arabic, made contributions not only to mathematics but to astronomy, mechanics, and medicine, embodying the wonderfully wide-ranging, unspecialized curiosity that characterized so many of these Golden Age thinkers. Men and women who did not see mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and astronomy as separate, walled-off disciplines, but as different windows looking out onto the very same vast and coherent universe. Rest now, my friend, here among the scrolls and the softly murmuring fountain. In our next chapter, we will lift our eyes upward, away from the pages of algebra and arithmetic, and look instead to the night sky itself, where astronomers of the Golden Age built great observatories, measured the size of the Earth with startling accuracy, and charted the stars with instruments so precise that sailors would rely on their work for centuries afterward. But that is a story for our next telling. For now, simply rest, and let the numbers and the equations blur softly into darkness, dissolving gently the way dreams dissolve at the edges. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 5. Beneath a Sky Full of Instruments. Hello again, my friend. Tonight, let us step outside, away from the quiet rooms of the House of Wisdom, out into a wide courtyard beneath the open night sky. Above us, the stars are scattered like scattered grains of rice flung across black silk, and here in this chapter, we meet the astronomers of the Golden Age, men and women who looked up at that same sky and refused to simply admire it. They wanted to measure it. Islamic astronomy grew, like so much else in this story, from a translated inheritance, particularly from the work of the Greek astronomer Ptolemy, whose great treatise on the motion of the planets and stars was translated into Arabic under the title Al-Majisti, from which we get the modern name Almagest. But where the Greeks had left off, Islamic astronomers began to push further, correcting errors in Ptolemy's calculations, building increasingly precise instruments, and constructing some of the first true observatories in human history, dedicated buildings, staffed by teams of scholars, designed specifically for the systematic, sustained observation of the heavens. Consider the astrolabe, my friend, a beautiful brass instrument, round and intricately engraved, that could be used to determine the time of day or night, to find the direction of Mecca for prayer, to calculate the altitude of stars, and to solve a whole range of astronomical and astrological problems, all by rotating a few finely calibrated brass discs against one another. The astrolabe was not invented by Islamic astronomers. Its origins trace back to ancient Greece, but it was in the Islamic world that the instrument was refined, elaborated, and manufactured on a wide scale, becoming an indispensable tool for astronomers, navigators, and religious scholars alike. Some surviving astrolabes from this era are so beautifully engraved, so finely balanced, that they are displayed today in museums not merely as scientific instruments, but as genuine works of art, holding both precision and beauty in the same small, gleaming disc of brass. In the city of Maragha, in what is now northwestern Iran, the astronomer Nasir al-Din al-Tusi established, in the year 1259, a great observatory under the patronage of the Mongol ruler Hulagu Khan. This might surprise you, my friend, that a Mongol conqueror, whose armies had done such terrible damage to Baghdad only a few years earlier, a story we will have to tell honestly in a later chapter, would then turn around and fund one of the greatest astronomical institutions of the age. But history is rarely simple, and even amid destruction, the thirst for knowledge found ways to persist and even to flourish anew. The Maragha Observatory housed a library said to contain hundreds of thousands of volumes, and it employed astronomers from across the Islamic world, from Persia, from China, developing new mathematical models to describe planetary motion that corrected some of the inconsistencies present in Ptolemy's ancient system. Centuries later, in the 16th century, the astronomer Taqi al-Din built an equally impressive observatory in Istanbul under the patronage of the Ottoman Sultan Murad III, equipped with instruments so advanced that some historians believe they rivaled or even exceeded those being used by Tycho Brahe in Denmark at almost exactly the same time, on the very eve of the scientific revolution in Europe. And here I want to pause with you, my friend, on a particular story that I find quietly astonishing every time I tell it. In the 9th century, under the patronage of the Caliph al-Ma'mun, a team of astronomers undertook an experiment to measure the circumference of the Earth. They traveled out onto the flat plains of the Syrian desert near Palmyra and split into two groups. One group walked due north, the other due south, each carefully measuring the distance traveled while also measuring the change in the angle of the sun, or in some accounts a particular star, above the horizon. From these two measurements, the change in angle and the distance traveled, they were able to calculate the length of 1 degree of the Earth's curvature, and from that, the full circumference of our planet. Their result was strikingly close to the true value, remarkably accurate for an experiment conducted on foot, across open desert, using nothing more than careful packing and simple angular instruments. Let that settle into you now, my friend. The image of scholars walking for days across the hot, flat sand, not for conquest, not for trade, but simply to answer a single patient question: how big is the world we live on? There is something deeply peaceful in that image, something worth carrying with you into sleep tonight. The idea that curiosity itself, quiet, careful, patient curiosity, can carry the human mind across entire deserts in search of an answer. Rest now, my friend. Let the stars above that ancient courtyard blur softly. Let the brass astrolabes dim into shadow. Let the desert walkers fade slowly from view as they continue their long, patient journey toward the horizon. In our next chapter, we will step down from the sky and into the sick room to meet the physicians of the Golden Age, whose careful observations and patient case notes would shape the practice of medicine for 1,000 years. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 6: The Physicians of the Golden Age. Welcome back, my friend. Let your eyes close a little heavier now, and let us walk together into a quiet hospital ward in the city of Baghdad, sometime in the early 10th century. Oil lamps burn low along whitewashed walls. A physician moves slowly between beds, pausing at each one, listening, observing, asking gentle questions, writing careful notes on a wax tablet before moving to the next patient. This is Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, known in the West by the Latinized name Rhazes, one of the greatest clinical physicians the world has ever known. Al-Razi was born around the year 854 in the Persian city of Ray, near modern Tehran, and though he came to medicine somewhat later in life, after early careers in music and philosophy, he approached the practice of healing with a rare combination of compassion and rigorous, almost modern scientific skepticism. He insisted on careful, direct clinical observation rather than blind deference to ancient authorities, even the revered Greek physician Galen, whose theories Al-Razi was willing to question and correct when his own patient observations contradicted them. This was, for its time, a genuinely radical stance, the idea that the evidence of one's own careful observation could outweigh the authority of a revered ancient text. Al-Razi is remembered today for many contributions, but two stand out with particular clarity. He wrote what is considered the first accurate clinical account distinguishing smallpox from measles, two diseases that had long been confused with one another, describing their symptoms with such careful, patient precision that his account remained a standard medical reference for centuries, translated and studied by physicians across Europe well into the early modern period. He also served for a time as the chief physician of a hospital in Baghdad, and legend holds that when tasked with choosing the location for a new hospital, he ordered pieces of fresh meat to be hung in different neighborhoods across the city, and chose the site where the meat took longest to spoil, reasoning that the freshest, cleanest air would be found there, and would therefore be healthiest for his patients. Whether or not this particular story is entirely accurate, it captures something true about Al-Razi's spirit. A mind unwilling to accept assumptions on faith alone, always searching for a method, however simple, to test an idea against the real world. Let your breathing slow further now, my friend, as we walk onward decades later to meet another towering figure of this medical tradition, a man born around 980 in a village near Bukhara, in what is now Uzbekistan. His name was Abu Ali al-Hussein ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, and he remains, even 1,000 years later, one of the most influential physicians and philosophers in human history. Ibn Sina was, by every account, a genuinely extraordinary child, said to have memorized the entire Quran by the age of 10, and to have mastered the medical knowledge of his teachers by his late teens, after which, the stories say, he had no more to learn from them and began treating patients and writing on his own. Across his lifetime, despite years of political instability, travel, and occasional imprisonment, as rulers competed for the prestige of having such a brilliant scholar in their court, Ibn Sina produced an extraordinary body of written work, most famously a vast medical encyclopedia known as the Canon of Medicine. The Canon of Medicine organized the entire medical knowledge of the ancient and Islamic worlds into a single, systematic, remarkably clear reference work, covering anatomy, physiology, diseases, pharmacology, and surgical techniques, all arranged with a clarity and logical structure that made it enormously useful to practicing physicians. This single work became the standard medical textbook not only across the Islamic world, but, once translated into Latin, across European universities as well, remaining in active use in some European medical schools until as late as the 17th century. Picture that, my friend, 600 years, generation after generation of medical students in Cairo, in Baghdad, in Bologna, in Paris, all learning from the same patient, careful voice, a man who had died centuries before any of them were born, his mind still teaching quietly from the page. Ibn Sina's contributions extended well beyond medicine into philosophy as well, where he developed influential arguments about the nature of existence, being, and the soul, arguments that would later shape both Islamic and, through translation, Christian medieval philosophy in Europe. He was, in the truest sense of the word, a universal scholar, unwilling to confine his restless curiosity to any single discipline. And it was not only individual physicians who advanced medicine during this era, but institutions as well. Hospitals, called bimaristans, flourished across the Islamic world, and they were, in many respects, startlingly modern in conception. The Great Al-Mansuri Hospital in Cairo, founded later in the 13th century, offered separate wards for different ailments, including dedicated wards for mental illness, treated with a degree of compassion and medical seriousness that was, for its era, remarkably progressive. These hospitals provided care regardless of a patient's ability to pay, offered musicians and storytellers to comfort patients recovering from illness, and gave departing patients a small stipend of money to support them until they could return to work, so that they would not be forced back into labor before they were truly healed. Rest with that thought for a moment, my friend, the image of a hospital not simply as a place to survive illness, but as a place designed, with real intention, for gentle human dignity. Medical schools attached to these hospitals trained new generations of physicians through both formal instruction and direct clinical apprenticeship. And some of the era's physicians, though far fewer in number and often working within the private sphere of women's health and midwifery, were women themselves, their names less thoroughly recorded by the historians of their time, but their presence noted nonetheless in the medical literature that survives. Rest now, my friend, here in the quiet hospital ward, the lamps burning low, the patients sleeping peacefully under careful watch. In our next chapter, we will turn to the alchemists and the students of optics, who peered into flasks and mirrors alike, searching for the hidden principles governing matter and light. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 7: Flasks, Mirrors, and Hidden Light. Hello again, my friend. Tonight, let us step into a small stone workshop on the outskirts of a great city, its shelves lined with clay vessels, its air faintly tinged with the smell of sulfur and heated metal. Here we meet the alchemists and the early chemists of the Islamic Golden Age, tinkerers and theorists who, in their patient search for hidden transformations in matter, laid down many of the essential foundations of modern chemistry. The most influential of these early figures is a scholar known as Jabir ibn Hayyan, called Geber in later Latin texts, whose exact biography remains somewhat uncertain, wrapped in legend the way old candle wax wraps slowly around the base of a burning flame. Whether the many works attributed to Jabir were written by one man, or, as some scholars now believe, compiled over generations by a whole school of thinkers writing under his name, the body of work associated with him introduced systematic laboratory techniques that would remain central to chemistry for centuries, including distillation, crystallization, filtration, and sublimation, alongside careful, methodical recipes for preparing various acids, salts, and compounds. This careful, hands-on, experimental approach, the insistence on testing ideas in the workshop rather than simply reasoning about them in the abstract, is one of the quiet, foundational gifts that the alchemists of this era gave to the future science of chemistry. Even though many of their larger ambitions, such as the transformation of base metals into gold, would ultimately prove impossible, the tools, the vocabulary, and the patient experimental method they developed along the way became permanently woven into the fabric of science. Even our modern word alcohol descends from the Arabic al-Kul, originally referring to a fine powder of antimony used as an eye cosmetic, and later applied, through a series of linguistic shifts, to the fine, purified vapors and spirits produced through distillation. Let us drift now toward a different kind of light, my friend, toward the study of vision itself. In the city of Basra, and later in Cairo, a scholar named Abu Ali al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham, known in the West as al-Hazan, undertook a study of optics so careful, so rigorous, and so thoroughly grounded in experiment that many historians consider him one of the true founding figures of the modern scientific method itself. Centuries before that method would be formally articulated by figures like Francis Bacon or Galileo in Europe. Before Ibn al-Haytham, many ancient thinkers, including some of the Greeks, believed that vision worked through rays emitted outward from the eye itself, reaching out to touch and perceive objects in the world. Ibn al-Haytham disagreed, and rather than simply arguing from theory, he built and conducted careful experiments to test his ideas, including detailed studies using a darkened chamber with a small hole in one wall, a device now known as a camera obscura, through which light from outside the chamber would project an inverted image onto the opposite interior wall. Through this and other patient experiments, he demonstrated that vision occurs because light travels from objects into the eye, not the reverse, a foundational and correct understanding of optics that remains the basis of how we understand vision and light today. His great work, known as the Book of Optics, written over years while he was, according to some accounts, feigning madness in Cairo in order to avoid a difficult assignment from a caliph, and instead living quietly under a kind of comfortable house confinement, would later be translated into Latin and profoundly influence European scientists including Roger Bacon, Johannes Kepler, and eventually the broader development of the scientific method during the European Renaissance and Scientific Revolution. Ibn al-Haytham insisted that claims about the natural world must be tested through controlled experiment and mathematical reasoning, not simply accepted on the authority of earlier scholars, however respected, a principle that sits at the very heart of science as it is practiced today. Rest now, my friend, and let the small stone workshop grow dim and quiet, the flasks cooling slowly on their shelves, the darkened chamber holding its small, glowing, upside-down image of the world outside. In our next chapter, we will leave the workshop behind and step outward into the wider Islamic world. Traveling west along the Mediterranean coast to the shimmering courts of Al-Andalus in Spain, where a different, equally luminous chapter of this golden age was unfolding. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 8: The Garden Kingdom of Al-Andalus. Welcome back, my friend. Let us travel now, softly and swiftly the way only a sleepy mind can travel, far to the west, across North Africa, across the narrow strait where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic, and into the sunlit land the Arabs called Al-Andalus, the land we know today as Spain and Portugal. Do you remember from our very first chapter, the young Umayyad prince, Abd al-Rahman, who fled the fall of his family in Damascus and crossed this same strait, alone and hunted, seeking refuge in a distant land? Let us find him again now, years later, no longer a frightened fugitive, but the founder of a new and glittering kingdom. Abd al-Rahman established himself in the city of Cordoba in the year 756, founding an independent emirate that his descendants would rule for centuries, eventually declaring themselves caliphs in their own right, rivaling the Abbasids of Baghdad in wealth, culture, and prestige. Under this Umayyad dynasty of Spain, Cordoba grew into one of the most magnificent cities in the entire world, a place where, by the 10th century, some accounts describe hundreds of thousands of residents, paved and lit streets long before most of the rest of Europe had such things, public baths, extensive libraries, and a level of urban sophistication that visitors from the colder, rougher kingdoms of northern Europe found almost unbelievable. At the heart of Cordoba stood, and still stands today, the great mosque, known as the Mezquita, its prayer hall filled with row upon row of double arches striped in red brick and white stone, stretching outward in every direction like a forest frozen in the moment of growing. Picture yourself walking beneath those arches now, my friend, the light filtering down in soft, alternating bands, the air cool and still, the sound of your own footsteps swallowed gently by the vastness of the space. Successive rulers expanded the mosque again and again as the city grew, each addition matching the style of what came before, so that the whole building reads, even today, like a single continuous thought, patiently extended across 2 centuries. Under the Umayyad emirs and later caliphs of Cordoba, and under the Taifa kingdoms that eventually succeeded them after the caliphate fractured in the 11th century, Al-Andalus became renowned for a spirit of relatively open intellectual and cultural exchange between Muslims, Christians, and Jews, a coexistence that scholars today sometimes call, with some degree of romanticism, but also real historical basis, convivencia, or living together. This was never a perfect utopia, and relations between the 3 communities shifted considerably over the centuries, with periods of real tension alongside periods of genuine collaboration. But it is true that Jewish and Christian scholars in Al-Andalus often worked, wrote, and thought in dialogue with their Muslim neighbors in ways that produced extraordinary intellectual fruit. Consider Hasdai ibn Shaprat, a Jewish physician and diplomat who served as an advisor to the Cordoban Caliph Abd al-Rahman III in the 10th century, using his position to support Jewish scholarship and communities not only within Al-Andalus, but across the wider Jewish diaspora. Consider Moses Maimonides, born in Cordoba in 1138, who would become one of the most important Jewish philosophers and legal scholars in history, writing largely in Arabic, deeply immersed in the same philosophical traditions, drawing on Aristotle through Islamic commentators, that shaped his Muslim contemporaries, before political instability eventually forced his family to leave Spain and settle in Egypt. Al-Andalus also became famous for its gardens. And here, my friend, let your mind rest for a moment on something gentler than politics or philosophy. Andalusian gardens, refined over centuries, combined flowing water, careful shade, fragrant plants, and geometric symmetry into spaces designed explicitly for peace and contemplation, the sound of trickling fountains masking the noise of the city beyond the walls, the scent of jasmine and orange blossom drifting on the evening air. The botanist Ibn Battal traveled extensively to study plants and agricultural techniques, compiling practical treatises on cultivation that helped introduce and refine crops across the Iberian Peninsula, including citrus fruits, rice, sugarcane, and cotton, transforming Spanish agriculture, and through it, Spanish cuisine and daily life in ways that persist to this day. The very idea of the enclosed, water-centered pleasure garden later echoed in the famous Alhambra Palace, built by the Nasrid dynasty of Granada in the 13th and 14th centuries, with its court of the lions and its endlessly reflecting pools, represents one of the most enduring aesthetic legacies of this entire civilization. Music, too, flourished in Al-Andalus. A musician named Zuryab, who had trained in Baghdad before falling out of favor and traveling west to Cordoba in the 9th century, is credited with revolutionizing Andalusian court life far beyond music alone, introducing new standards of table manners, fashion, hairstyling, and cuisine, including, according to legend, the practice of serving meals in a specific sequence of courses: soup, then meat, then dessert, a structure that would eventually influence dining customs across Europe. He is also credited with adding a fifth string to the oud, the pear-shaped lute that remains central to music across the Arab world today, deepening its range and expressive possibility. Rest now, my friend, here among the fountains and the orange blossoms, the double arches of the mezquita fading softly into shadow. In our next chapter, we will follow the flow of knowledge as it moved out of Al-Andalus and into the rest of Europe, through the remarkable translation workshops of Toledo, where a whole new generation of Christian European scholars gathered to drink deeply from the wells of Arabic learning. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 9: The Translators of Toledo. Hello again, my friend. Let your body grow heavier now, sinking further into rest, as we travel to the city of Toledo in central Spain in the years following its capture by Christian forces in 1085. You might expect, my friend, that such a conquest would mean the end of learning in that city, the closing of libraries, the scattering of scholars. But history once again surprises us with its gentleness in unexpected places. Toledo, under its new Christian rulers, became instead one of the single most important sites of intellectual transmission in world history, a place where the accumulated learning of centuries of Islamic scholarship began, finally, to flow northward into the rest of Europe. Toledo possessed something enormously valuable: libraries full of Arabic manuscripts, accumulated over centuries of Andalusian scholarship, covering philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, including, remember, the Arabic translations and commentaries on ancient Greek works that had been carefully gathered and expanded upon since the days of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, centuries earlier. Christian scholars from across Europe, sensing the extraordinary value of this collection, began traveling to Toledo specifically to study and translate these texts, working often in careful collaboration with local Jewish and Mozarab, meaning Arabic-speaking Christian, translators who could bridge the gap between Arabic and Latin. One especially important figure was Gerard of Cremona, an Italian scholar who traveled to Toledo in the 12th century specifically because, according to his own account, he had heard of Ptolemy's Almagest and could not find a Latin copy anywhere, only the Arabic translations preserved in Spain. Once he arrived, however, Gerard found himself surrounded by such an overwhelming wealth of scientific material that he remained in Toledo for the rest of his life, eventually translating, by some estimates, more than 70 works from Arabic into Latin, including not only the Almagest but also Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, Al-Khwarizmi's algebraic treatises, and numerous works of Aristotle accompanied by their Arabic commentaries. These commentaries deserve a moment of their own here, my friend, because among the most influential Islamic philosophers whose work reached Europe through this Toledo pipeline was Ibn Rushd, known in the Latin West as Averroes, a scholar born in Cordoba in 1126, who served as a judge and physician while producing extraordinarily detailed commentaries on the works of Aristotle. Ibn Rushd's commentaries were so thorough, so philosophically rigorous, that when they reached medieval European universities, he became known simply as the commentator, his name almost inseparable from Aristotle's own, shaping the way European scholastic philosophers, including Thomas Aquinas, engaged with Aristotelian thought for centuries afterward. Ibn Rushd's own intellectual life was not without controversy, both within the Islamic world and later in Christian Europe. He engaged in a famous philosophical dispute with an earlier Islamic theologian, Al-Ghazali, who had written a work titled The Incoherence of the Philosophers, arguing that certain philosophical positions, particularly around causation and the eternity of the world, were incompatible with Islamic theology. Ibn Rushd responded with his own work, The Incoherence of the Incoherence, mounting a passionate defense of philosophical reasoning as compatible with, rather than opposed to, religious faith. This debate, carried out across decades and continents, reflects something important about this entire civilization, my friend, a culture that took ideas seriously enough to argue about them fiercely, in writing across generations, never content to let a difficult question simply rest unexamined. Through Toledo, and through similar centers of translation in Sicily, where a similarly mixed Arab, Greek, and Latin culture flourished under Norman rule, the accumulated scientific, medical, and philosophical knowledge of centuries of Islamic scholarship poured into medieval European universities, into Paris, into Oxford, into Bologna, feeding directly into the intellectual movements that would eventually be called scholasticism, and later still, the Renaissance. It is not an exaggeration, my friend, to say that when you picture a medieval European scholar poring over a manuscript by candlelight, there is a very good chance that manuscript traces its intellectual lineage back through Toledo, back through Cordoba, back through Baghdad, back through the patient translators of the House of Wisdom, all the way to ancient Alexandria and Athens, an unbroken chain of hands passing a single flickering lamp across more than 1,000 years and thousands of miles. Rest now, my friend, here among the sunlit archives of Toledo, the scratch of quills on parchment slowly fading into silence. In our next chapter, we will turn from Spain back toward the east to explore how trade, exploration, and geography connected this vast civilization together, and to meet the great travelers whose journeys mapped much of the known world. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 10: The Roads That Held the World Together. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, let us imagine ourselves standing at a crossroads caravanserai, one of those great stone wayside inns built every day's journey apart along the trade routes of the Islamic world, where camels kneel in the courtyard, their bells falling quiet at last after a long day's walk, and merchants of every language settle in for the night around small fires. This vast civilization, stretching at its height from Spain to Central Asia, was held together not only by shared faith and shared language, but by roads, rivers, and sea lanes, and by an extraordinary spirit of travel and curiosity about the wider world. Muslim merchants sailed the Indian Ocean on ships called dhows, riding the seasonal monsoon winds that blow reliably from the southwest in summer and the northeast in winter, carrying goods between the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. Along the East African coast, this trade gave rise to a whole flourishing Swahili civilization, city-states like Kilwa and Mombasa, where Arabic, Persian, and African cultures blended into something new, trading gold, ivory, and enslaved people. A difficult and painful part of this history that deserves honesty rather than a comfortable silence, alongside spices, textiles, and ceramics carried in from across the ocean. Overland, the routes we now call the Silk Road connected the Islamic world to China, carrying silk and paper and porcelain eastward and westward in a slow, patient exchange that had been running for centuries already by the time of the Golden Age, but which flourished with new vigor under the relative political stability that large, well-organized Islamic states could provide across huge stretches of territory. Geographers of this era took the study of these roads and lands with tremendous seriousness. Al-Idrisi, a scholar born in Ceuta in North Africa, spent years at the court of the Norman king Roger II of Sicily, an unusual and fascinating cross-cultural partnership, compiling a massive geographical work along with an engraved silver planisphere depicting the known world, remarkably accurate for its time, drawing on Islamic, Greek, and local Sicilian knowledge all at once. But of all the travelers of this era, none looms larger in memory, my friend, than a young man from Tangier named Ibn Battuta, who set out in the year 1325 at the age of 21, intending simply to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, as countless Muslims had done before him. Instead, something in him could not stop moving. Over the next nearly 30 years, Ibn Battuta traveled an estimated 75,000 miles, further than any other known traveler in pre-modern history, crossing North Africa, the Middle East, East Africa, Central Asia, India, the Maldives, Southeast Asia, and China, before eventually returning home to Morocco and dictating an account of his travels known as the Rihla, meaning simply the journey. Imagine him now, my friend, gently, as you drift, crossing the Sahara by camel caravan to visit the wealthy Mali Empire, where he observed with wonder the sheer scale of gold possessed by the court of Mansa Musa's successors, or sailing down the Swahili coast, marveling at the coral stone architecture of Kilwa, or serving for a time as a judge in Delhi under the eccentric and occasionally terrifying Sultan Mohammed bin Tughlaq, or being shipwrecked and robbed more than once, only to dust himself off and continue onward, driven by a restlessness that seemed to have no true end point except the whole wide world itself. His account remains one of the single richest surviving descriptions of the 14th century world, a patchwork quilt of cultures and kingdoms all glimpsed by one extraordinarily well-traveled pair of eyes. And if Ibn Battuta represents the Golden Age's outward gaze, its endless curiosity about distant lands, then the historian Ibn Khaldun, born in Tunis in 1332, represents its capacity for turning that same rigorous curiosity inward, toward the patterns of history and society themselves. In his great work, the Muqaddimah, meaning introduction, intended originally as a preface to a larger history of the world, Ibn Khaldun developed what many scholars consider the first truly systematic theory of social science, examining how dynasties rise and fall, how a sense of group solidarity, which he called asabiya, binds a rising society together in its early, hungry years, and how that same solidarity tends to loosen and dissolve once a dynasty grows comfortable, wealthy, and complacent across succeeding generations. Ibn Khaldun's analysis feels, even today, remarkably modern in its rigor, examining economics, demographics, urban development, and the psychology of power with a clear-eyed, almost detached analytical distance that few historians before him had achieved. He wrote from hard-won experience too, having served, sometimes dangerously, in the volatile courts of various North African rulers, and having once, memorably, ridden out to negotiate personally with the terrifying conqueror Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, outside the besieged walls of Damascus, an encounter he later described in his own writings with remarkable composure. Rest now, my friend, here at the edge of the caravanserai courtyard, the last embers of the fire glowing low, the camels settled quietly for the night, the roads outside stretching away in every direction toward distant, half-imagined horizons. In our next chapter, we will turn to poetry and storytelling, to the verses of Rumi and the tales of 1001 Nights, the beating creative heart of this entire civilization. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 11, 1000 Nights of Story and Song. Hello again, my friend. Let your mind grow soft and unfocused now, the way it does just before a dream begins, because tonight we turn to poetry, music, and story. The warm beating heart that gave this whole civilization its color and its music, even amid all the mathematics and the medicine we have wandered through so far. You already know one piece of this story, my friend, even if you have never realized it. The tales of Scheherazade, the clever queen who saves her own life night after night by telling her husband, the king, an endless sequence of enthralling stories, each one interrupted at its most exciting moment, so that the king must let her live one more night to hear how it ends. This frame story holds within it hundreds of individual tales gathered over centuries from Persian, Indian, and Arabic storytelling traditions. Tales of Sinbad the Sailor and his fantastic voyages, of Aladdin and his enchanted lamp, of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, tales that traveled and grew and changed hands for 1,000 years before being gathered into the collection known as the 1001 Nights, or Alf Layla wa Layla. These stories were not, for the most part, the product of a single author sitting down to write a single book. They were folk tales, oral traditions, refined and elaborated over centuries by countless anonymous storytellers, gathered gradually into written collections, expanded upon by different scribes in different eras and different cities, so that the collection we know today is really more like a great river fed by 1,000 smaller streams, each one carrying its own particular flavor of wonder, of humor, of caution, of delight. When European translators finally brought these tales to Western audiences in the 18th century, they became, almost overnight, some of the most beloved stories in the world, reshaping Western ideas of the Middle East, sometimes accurately and sometimes through a hazy, romanticized lens, for centuries afterward. Beyond these gathered folk tales, this era also produced towering individual voices in poetry. Let us drift now toward Persia, toward the 13th century, to meet a man named Jalal al-Din Rumi, born in the region of Balkh, in what is now Afghanistan, whose family fled westward ahead of the advancing Mongol armies, eventually settling in the Anatolian city of Konya. There, Rumi's life was transformed by his friendship with a wandering mystic named Shams of Tabriz, a relationship so intense, so spiritually consuming, that when Shams disappeared, possibly murdered by jealous disciples, Rumi's grief poured out into some of the most beautiful mystical poetry ever written in any language, gathered eventually into a vast collection called the Masnavi, alongside his shorter lyric poems known as the Diwan. Rumi's poetry speaks of love as a path toward the divine, using the ordinary language of human longing, of separation and reunion, of a reed flute crying out because it has been cut from its reed bed and longs to return, as a metaphor for the soul's own longing to return to its divine source. His poetry remains, remarkably, among the best-selling poetry in the world today, nearly 8 centuries after his death, translated into dozens of languages, read by people of every faith and no faith at all, because the ache he describes, the longing for connection, for meaning, for home, speaks to something that does not belong to any single century or culture. Rumi founded, or rather inspired the later founding of, the Mevlevi Sufi order, whose practice of turning, spinning slowly and repeatedly in a meditative dance meant to bring the dancer closer to the divine, gave the Western world the phrase whirling dervishes. Picture it now, my friend, if you can hold the image gently without it startling you awake. A circle of dancers in tall conical hats and wide white skirts, arms outstretched, One palm turned up toward heaven and one turned down toward the earth, turning slowly, hypnotically, to the sound of a reed flute and a soft drum, around and around, until the boundary between dancer and dance, between self and surrounding, seems gently to dissolve. Sufism itself, the broader mystical tradition of Islam from which Rumi's order emerged, produced many other towering poetic voices across this era. Hafez, writing in 14th century Shiraz, composed lyric poems so beloved that copies of his collected diwan became a common household object across Persia, used even today, alongside the Quran, for a traditional practice of opening the book at random to seek guidance or reflection on a difficult question. Adar of Nishapur wrote The Conference of the Birds, an allegorical poem in which a group of birds undertake an arduous journey across 7 valleys in search of a mythical king bird called the Simurgh, only to discover, in the story's quiet, luminous final twist, that they themselves, in their collective unity, are the very thing they sought all along. Arabic poetry flourished as well, of course, carrying forward a tradition that predated Islam itself, rooted in the pre-Islamic qasida form, the long ode often composed and recited by poets in the courts of caliphs and sultans, prized as one of the highest art forms of the culture, alongside a flourishing tradition of Arabic prose, historical writing, and later the makama, a genre of rhymed prose storytelling filled with wit, wordplay, and clever trickster narrators. Rest now, my friend, here in this soft, layered world of verse and story, the reed flute still singing somewhere in the distance, the dervishes still slowly turning. In our next chapter, we must, with honesty and care, turn to a harder part of our story, the years when a great storm swept in from the east and threatened to end this golden age entirely. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 12, The Storm from the East. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight's chapter is a heavier one, so let yourself sink even more deeply into softness as I tell it, because even in sadness, there can be a kind of gentle, settling rest, the way rain settles dust. Every long story of flourishing, my friend, eventually meets a chapter of hardship, and ours is no exception. In the early 13th century, far to the east, on the steppes of Mongolia, a leader named Temujin united the nomadic tribes of the region under his rule and took the title Genghis Khan. What followed was one of the most rapid and devastating waves of conquest in human history, as Mongol armies swept outward from Mongolia in every direction, toppling kingdoms and empires with terrifying speed and, in many cases, terrifying brutality. The wealthy, sophisticated cities of Central Asia, including the great Khwarezmian centers of learning that had produced so many scholars over the centuries, were struck first. Several of them destroyed so completely that their populations were, according to some historical accounts, slaughtered almost entirely, their libraries burned, their canals and irrigation systems wrecked in ways that damaged the agricultural productivity of the region for generations afterward. The wave of conquest continued under Genghis Khan's descendants, and in the year 1258, a Mongol army led by Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu Khan, arrived at the gates of Baghdad itself, the city that had stood for 500 years as the intellectual heart of the Islamic world, whose round walls had sheltered the House of Wisdom, whose libraries held the accumulated translated wisdom of Greece, Persia, and India, was besieged, and after a short but ferocious assault, it fell. What followed, my friend, was one of the great tragedies of world intellectual history. The Mongol forces sacked the city, and the Abbasid Caliph al-Mustasim was killed. Contemporary and near-contemporary accounts, though likely exaggerated in their precise numbers, describe massive loss of life and the systematic destruction of the city's libraries, including, according to a persistent and often repeated legend, so many books thrown into the Tigris River that its waters ran black with ink for days, or in some versions of the story, red with blood mixed with the ink, a haunting, terrible image that has echoed through history ever since as a symbol of catastrophic cultural loss. Whether every detail of that particular image is literal historical fact or has grown, over centuries of retelling, into something closer to legend, the underlying truth remains sound and sobering. An immense body of accumulated human knowledge, centuries in the making, was lost or scattered in a matter of days. I want to rest with you here for a moment, my friend, not to frighten you, but because I think it is worth feeling, gently, the real weight of what was lost, before we continue onward to what came after. Somewhere in that burning city were manuscripts that no one alive would ever read again, ideas half-finished, letters between friends, medical case notes, childhood books, the ordinary as well as the extraordinary, all gone together into smoke and river water. It is a genuinely sad chapter, and it deserves to be felt as sad, even as we remind ourselves, gently, that this is not where our story ends. Because remarkably, my friend, the wider civilization of the Islamic Golden Age did not end with the fall of Baghdad, however devastating that single loss was. The flame, carried so carefully for 500 years, had already spread to too many other lamps for the storm to extinguish entirely. In Cairo, a new center of power and learning was rising under the Mamluk Sultanate, a dynasty of former slave soldiers who would, only a few years after the fall of Baghdad, achieve something few believed possible. They would stop the Mongol advance entirely. In the year 1260, at a place called Ain Jalut in Galilee, the Mamluk army, led by the formidable general and future Sultan Baybars, met a Mongol force in open battle and defeated it decisively, marking the first major halt to the seemingly unstoppable Mongol expansion anywhere in the world. It was a turning point, my friend, a moment where the tide, having swept so much away, finally began to still. The Mamluks went on to rule Egypt and Syria for nearly 250 years, and under their patronage, Cairo blossomed into a magnificent new center of Islamic learning, art, and architecture, its markets and mosques absorbing scholars and craftsmen who had fled the destruction further east, carrying with them fragments of the old libraries, memorized poems, salvaged manuscripts, and the simple, stubborn determination to keep building. And remember, too, my friend, that even Hulagu Khan himself, only a year after the destruction of Baghdad, would go on to found the observatory at Maragha that we visited together in an earlier chapter, gathering astronomers from across the shattered and reforming Islamic world to continue their patient study of the stars. Even amid conquest, even amid grief, the thread of curiosity proved remarkably difficult to fully sever. Later Mongol rulers themselves, particularly in Persia and Central Asia, would convert to Islam within a few generations, becoming patrons of Islamic art, architecture, and learning in their own right, absorbed in the end into the very civilization their ancestors had once nearly destroyed. Rest now, my friend, if you can, letting the smoke and the sadness of this chapter drift slowly away like a fog lifting from a river at dawn. In our next chapter, we will follow the survivors and the rebuilders eastward and westward at once, to Cairo under the Mamluks and onward to the rise of three great new empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, who would carry the light of this civilization forward into entirely new and magnificent forms. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 13, Cairo, City of 1,000 Minarets. Hello again, my friend. Let us breathe out slowly together now, releasing the heaviness of our last chapter, and let ourselves settle into a gentler scene, the markets and mosques of Mamluk Cairo, sometime in the 14th century, at what many historians consider the very height of that city's medieval glory. Under the Mamluk sultans, Cairo grew into one of the largest and wealthiest cities in the entire world, its position secured by its control over the lucrative spice trade passing from the Indian Ocean, through the Red Sea, and onward to the markets of the Mediterranean and Europe. Venetian merchants sailed regularly to Alexandria and Cairo to purchase pepper, cinnamon, and other spices that Mamluk middlemen had acquired from Arab and Indian traders further east. And this position at the center of one of the most profitable trade networks on Earth funded an extraordinary flourishing of architecture and scholarship. Walk with me now, my friend, through the old quarter of Cairo, past mosque after mosque, madrasa after madrasa, their tall, elegant minarets rising like a forest of pale stone fingers against the evening sky, so numerous that Cairo earned, over the centuries, the affectionate nickname City of 1,000 Minarets. The Mamluk sultans and their emirs competed with one another to fund ever more elaborate religious and charitable buildings. Mosques combined with hospitals, schools, and mausoleums, decorated with intricate stone carving, colorful marble paneling, and soaring domes carved with geometric star patterns so complex that mathematicians today still study them for the sophisticated understanding of symmetry and tiling they display. Patterns that anticipate certain principles of geometry that would not be formally described in Western mathematics until the 20th century. Al-Azhar, a mosque and center of learning founded in Cairo back in the 10th century under the earlier Fatimid dynasty, continued to grow in importance during this era, eventually becoming, and remaining today, one of the oldest continuously operating universities in the entire world, and one of the most respected centers of Islamic scholarship anywhere on Earth. Students traveled to study there from across the Islamic world, drawn by its reputation, sitting in circles around respected teachers in the mosque's vast courtyard, much as students had once gathered around scholars in the house of wisdom centuries before and 1,000 miles away. The historian and scholar al-Makhrizi, writing in 15th century Cairo, produced detailed chronicles of the city's history, its markets, its famines, its plagues, and its festivals, giving later historians an extraordinarily rich window into the daily texture of medieval Cairene life. He wrote, among other things, about the terrible arrival of the Black Death in the mid-14th century, which swept through Cairo as it did through so much of the world, killing, by some estimates, as much as a third of the city's population, a reminder that even at the height of its glory, this civilization, like every human civilization, remained vulnerable to forces entirely beyond its control. And yet Cairo endured and rebuilt, and continued producing scholarship and art for centuries more, a testament to something we have seen again and again in this long story, my friend, the remarkable resilience of a civilization that valued learning so deeply that it kept rebuilding its libraries and its schools after every disaster, whether that disaster came from Mongol armies or from plague or from famine, refusing to let any single catastrophe be the final word. Rest now, my friend, here beneath Cairo's forest of minarets, the call to evening prayer drifting softly across the rooftops. In our next chapter, we will travel onward to meet three great empires rising almost simultaneously across the breadth of the Islamic world in the early modern era: the Ottomans in Anatolia and beyond, the Safavids in Persia, and the Mughals in India, each one carrying this civilization's inheritance forward into astonishing new heights of art, architecture, and power. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 14, Three Crescents Rising. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight we watch three great empires rise, almost in parallel, like three lamps being lit one after another in three different rooms of the same great sleeping house. By the early 16th century, the Islamic world had reorganized itself into three vast and powerful states: the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire, each magnificent in its own way, each carrying forward in its own particular accent the long inheritance of the Golden Age. Let us begin with the Ottomans, whose story began humbly in the 13th century as one small principality among many in Anatolia, founded by a Turkish leader named Osman, from whom the dynasty took its name. Over the following centuries, through a combination of skilled military organization, clever diplomacy, and sheer persistence, the Ottomans expanded steadily, absorbing their neighboring principalities, and, in the year 1453, achieving something that had been attempted and failed for centuries: the conquest of Constantinople itself, the ancient capital of the Byzantine Empire, under the young and remarkably determined Sultan named II. Picture the great walls of Constantinople, my friend, walls that had withstood siege after siege for over 1,000 years, finally breached, and picture Mehmed riding through the fallen city, ordering that its churches, its scholars, and much of its population be treated with a degree of care intended to preserve the city's greatness rather than destroy it, renaming it Istanbul and making it his new capital. Under Mehmed and his successors, particularly the long and glorious reign of Suleiman the Magnificent in the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire grew to encompass much of southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, becoming one of the most powerful and sophisticated states on earth. Ottoman architecture reached extraordinary heights under the guidance of the great architect Mimar Sinan, who served as chief royal architect for decades in the 16th century, designing hundreds of mosques, bridges, and public buildings across the empire. His masterpiece, the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, completed near the end of his long life, features a dome so vast and so perfectly engineered that Sinan himself considered it the culmination of his life's work, a structure that seems, even today, to hover almost weightlessly above the worshippers beneath it. Istanbul itself, under Ottoman rule, became a magnificent cosmopolitan capital, its skyline a forest of domes and minarets reflecting in the waters of the Bosphorus, its markets, particularly the vast covered Grand Bazaar, drawing merchants from across 3 continents. Now let us drift southeast, my friend, into Persia, where in the year 1501 a young leader named Ismail founded the Safavid dynasty, establishing Twelver Shia Islam as the official religion of Persia, a decision that would shape the religious and cultural identity of Iran down to the present day. The Safavid Empire reached its own golden height under Shah Abbas the Great, who ruled from 1588 to 1629, and who transformed his capital, Isfahan, into one of the most beautiful cities in the world. At the heart of Isfahan, Shah Abbas built a vast central square, known as Naqsh-e-Jahan, meaning image of the world, surrounded by magnificent buildings. The Shah Mosque with its soaring turquoise dome, the more intimate Sheikh Lotfallah Mosque with its cream-colored dome that seems to shift color throughout the day as the light moves across it, and the Ali Kapu Palace, from whose elevated terrace the Shah could watch polo matches and public celebrations unfold across the square below. Persian miniature painting also flourished under Safavid patronage, artists like Riza Abbasi creating exquisitely detailed illustrated manuscripts, their tiny, jewel-like brushstrokes depicting court scenes, garden parties, and scenes from beloved Persian epic poems, particularly Ferdowsi's great Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, composed centuries earlier but continuously illustrated and treasured across generations. And now, my friend, let us travel further still, across the mountains of Afghanistan and down onto the plains of northern India, where in the year 1526, a Central Asian prince named Babur, a descendant of both Genghis Khan and the great conqueror Timur, established the Mughal Empire after a decisive victory at the Battle of Panipat. Babur's grandson, Akbar, would go on to build one of history's great empires, ruling with a notable degree of religious tolerance for his era, engaging Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and Zoroastrian scholars alike in philosophical debate at his court, and administering a vast, diverse population through a remarkably sophisticated bureaucracy. But it is Akbar's great-grandson, Shah Jahan, whose name is forever linked to the single most famous building this entire civilization ever produced. In 1631, grieving the death of his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, during childbirth, Shah Jahan commissioned a mausoleum to hold her remains, a project that would take over 20 years and the labor of some 20,000 workers to complete. The result, Rising in white marble beside the Yamuna River near Agra is the Taj Mahal, its perfectly symmetrical dome and minarets reflected in a long, still pool before it. Its marble surface inlaid with semi-precious stones in delicate floral patterns, seeming to glow pink at dawn, white at midday, and golden at sunset, as if the building itself breathes gently with the changing light. It remains, even now, centuries later, one of the most recognized and beloved buildings on the entire planet, a love letter carved permanently into stone. Rest now, my friend, here beneath three different domes at once: the turquoise of Isfahan, the soaring vastness of the Selimiya, the pale marble glow of the Taj Mahal, three separate lamps lit from the same ancient flame. In our next chapter, we will look more closely at the art, architecture, and everyday beauty that this whole broad civilization produced across its many centuries and many lands, from tile work to calligraphy to the quiet craft of the everyday object. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 15: The Art of Everyday Beauty. Hello again, my friend. Tonight, let us slow down even further and look closely at smaller things: the curling line of a letter, the blue and white gleam of a tile, the soft nap of a woven carpet, because so much of what this civilization left behind lives not only in grand mosques and vast empires, but in the quiet, patient beauty of everyday craft. Begin with calligraphy, my friend, which held a place of honor in Islamic art unlike almost anywhere else in the world, because the Arabic script, in which the Quran itself was revealed, came to be regarded as a form of sacred art in its own right. Over the centuries, master calligraphers developed elaborate, distinct scripts: the angular, monumental Kufic script often used in early Quran manuscripts and architectural inscriptions, and the flowing, cursive Naskh and Thuluth scripts that later became common in both religious texts and everyday writing. Calligraphers trained for years, sometimes decades, perfecting the precise angle of a reed pen, the exact proportion between the height and width of each letter, treating the act of writing itself as a spiritual discipline, a form of prayer performed with ink rather than words alone. Because artistic tradition across much of the Islamic world generally avoided figurative representation, particularly in religious contexts, artists poured extraordinary creative energy instead into geometric pattern and calligraphic ornament, developing a visual language of endlessly repeating, endlessly interlocking shapes, stars, polygons, and interlacing lines that could be extended, in principle, infinitely in every direction, evoking, for many worshippers, a visual metaphor for the infinite nature of the divine. Look closely at these patterns, my friend, if you ever have the chance in waking life, at the tile work of a mosque or the carved wooden screen of an old window, and you will often find that they are built from a small number of simple geometric rules, repeated and combined with such sophistication that the eye can wander across them for many minutes, always finding some new symmetry it had not noticed before, a kind of visual lullaby in stone and tile. Ceramics flourished as well, particularly the brilliant blue and white pottery and tile work that developed across Persia and later influenced, and was influenced by, Chinese porcelain traded along those same long-distance trade routes we walked together in an earlier chapter. The city of Kashan in Persia became particularly famous for its lusterware, ceramics glazed with a thin metallic finish that gives the surface a warm, iridescent shimmer, catching candlelight in a way that must have seemed, in a dim room centuries ago, almost magical. Textiles carried this civilization's reputation across the known world. Persian and Ottoman carpets, woven by hand, often by women working within family workshops over months or even years for a single large carpet, became prized luxury objects as far away as Renaissance Europe, appearing, in fact, in the background of numerous European paintings from that era, a quiet testament to how deeply these woven creations had penetrated the imagination and the trade networks of the wider world. Silk weaving, Brocade work and embroidery flourished across the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal courts alike, each region developing its own distinct palette and pattern language, recognizable at a glance to those trained to see the difference. And let us not forget the garden, my friend, which we touched upon briefly in Andalusian Spain, but which appeared in different forms across the entire breadth of this civilization. From the charbagh, the four-part garden design of Persia and later Mughal India, divided by channels of water into four quadrants symbolizing the four rivers of paradise described in the Quran, to the more intimate courtyard gardens tucked behind the walls of countless ordinary homes, offering their inhabitants a small, private patch of green and quiet in the midst of a busy, dusty city. The garden, across this entire civilization, was never merely decorative. It was a small, deliberate echo of paradise, built here on earth for people to rest in during their brief and busy lives, not unlike, perhaps, the rest you are giving yourself right now, my friend, as you lie quietly listening to this story. Rest now in that imagined garden, the water trickling softly between geometric beds of roses and jasmine, the tilework glowing faintly blue in the moonlight. In our next chapter, we will consider law, governance, and the diverse social fabric of everyday life across the Islamic world. The scholars, the guild workers, the market inspectors, and the ordinary families whose daily lives gave this whole grand story its true texture. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 16. The Quiet Machinery of Law. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight's chapter moves a little more slowly, a little more thoughtfully, like a judge weighing evidence late into the evening by lamplight, because we are going to look at how this vast civilization actually governed itself day to day. The quiet, patient machinery of law and scholarship that allowed such an enormous and diverse empire to function with any coherence at all across so many centuries and so many lands. Islamic law, known as Sharia, developed not as a single, fixed code handed down all at once, but as a rich, evolving tradition of legal reasoning, drawing primarily on the Quran and the recorded example of the Prophet Muhammad, known as the Hadith and Sunnah, but also on the careful, scholarly reasoning of generations of jurists who worked to apply these foundational sources to new and unforeseen situations as society grew larger and more complex. Over the first few centuries of Islamic history, distinct schools of legal thought emerged, most prominently the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali schools within Sunni Islam, along with the Jafari school within Shia Islam, each developing its own particular methods and traditions of legal interpretation, yet generally coexisting with mutual respect rather than open conflict, much as different universities today might favor different scholarly traditions within the same broader field. The scholars who developed and applied this law, known as the ulama, held immense social respect and often considerable independence from political rulers. A caliph or sultan held military and administrative power, but questions of religious law were typically the domain of these scholars, trained for years in dedicated schools called madrasas, which spread across the Islamic world from the 11th century onward, funded generously through a system of charitable religious endowments known as waqf. A waqf might fund not only a school, but also a library, a hospital, a public fountain, or a soup kitchen for the poor, often all connected to the same religious complex, meaning that education, healthcare, and charity were frequently woven together into the very same physical and financial institution, supported by wealthy donors seeking both public benefit and spiritual reward. Within cities, a public official known as the muhtazib served as a kind of market inspector and public order official, responsible for ensuring fair weights and measures in the marketplace, checking the quality of goods sold to the public, maintaining basic standards of public hygiene and conduct, and generally keeping the bustling, crowded commercial heart of the city running smoothly and honestly. Guilds, meanwhile, organized craftsmen and merchants by trade, weavers, dyers, metalworkers, booksellers, each guild maintaining its own standards of quality and training, often with a distinct sense of professional pride and identity passed down from master to apprentice over years of careful, hands-on instruction. Let your mind wander now, my friend, through a typical medieval Islamic city, not through its palaces or its grand mosques, which we have already visited together, but through its ordinary neighborhoods, its narrow, shaded streets designed specifically to provide relief from the sun, its public bathhouses called hammams, where people gathered not only to wash but to socialize, to hear news, to arrange marriages, to simply rest in warm, steam-filled rooms after a long day's work. Picture the local baker, whose oven served an entire neighborhood. Since most households did not have full ovens of their own, families bringing their own prepared dough to be baked communally each morning, the whole street filling with the smell of fresh bread as the sun rose. Family life, too, deserves its gentle place in this story. My friend, even though the historical record, as is so often true across history everywhere, preserves the voices of the wealthy and the educated far more thoroughly than the voices of ordinary people. Marriage contracts from this era, many of which survive in archives across the Islamic world, reveal women negotiating specific financial and personal terms before marriage, including the right to work, to travel, or to be the sole wife of their husband, terms that were legally binding and enforceable, suggesting a social reality often more complex and more varied than simple, sweeping generalizations about the era can capture. And though we have already met several extraordinary women in this story, Zubaydah with her wells along the Pilgrim Road, let us pause now to remember a few more. Fatima al-Fihri, a wealthy woman in 9th century Fez, in what is now Morocco, used her inheritance to found the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, which many historians and even the record-keeping organization Guinness World Records recognize as the oldest continuously operating institution of higher education anywhere in the world, older even than the University of Bologna or Oxford. Rest with that thought for a moment, my friend. A university, still teaching students today, in the year 2026, founded by a single determined woman more than 1,100 years ago, using her own inherited wealth to build something that would outlast her by over a millennium. And there was Aisha bint Ahmed ibn Qudama, along with numerous other women recorded across the centuries as transmitters of hadith, the recorded sayings and actions of the Prophet, a role that required rigorous memorization and rigorous scholarly credentialing, since the reliability of a hadith depended heavily on the trustworthiness of the chain of people who had transmitted it across generations. Women scholars, though certainly a minority within the broader scholarly class, and though the surviving records of their work and lives are frustratingly sparse compared to their male contemporaries, were nonetheless present throughout this long history, teaching, writing, and preserving knowledge, alongside the men whose names have generally echoed more loudly through the centuries. Rest now, my friend, here in the warm, steam-filled quiet of the bathhouse, the smell of fresh bread still drifting faintly from the corner oven, the soft murmur of neighborhood gossip fading gently into silence. In our next chapter, we will look at engineering and technology, the water wheels, the windmills, and the mechanical marvels that this civilization built to ease the burdens of everyday labor. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 17: Wheels, Wells, and Wonderful Machines. Hello again, my friend. Tonight, let us listen to a sound that would have been common across the cities and farmland of the Islamic world for centuries: the slow, rhythmic creak of a water wheel turning, lifting water patiently, scoop by scoop, from a river below up into a channel that would carry it out across dry fields, transforming land that would otherwise be barren into fertile, productive farmland. Engineering in the Islamic Golden Age, much like its medicine and its mathematics, grew from a foundation of inherited knowledge: Roman aqueducts, Persian irrigation systems, Egyptian water management techniques refined over thousands of years along the Nile, and then expanded upon with real creativity and technical sophistication. Perhaps no figure represents this spirit of inventive engineering better than Al-Jazari, who worked in the late 12th and early 13th centuries in the region of Diyarbakir, in what is now southeastern Turkey, serving as chief engineer to a local dynasty of rulers. Al-Jazari wrote a remarkable book titled The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, filled with detailed descriptions and beautifully illustrated diagrams of water clocks, automated fountains, mechanical musical instruments, and most strikingly, a series of humanoid automata, mechanical figures designed to perform specific repeated actions, including one famous device depicting a small boat carrying mechanical musicians who would play instruments automatically. Powered by a hidden system of water-driven cams and levers, entertaining guests at royal banquets. His elephant clock, another of his celebrated creations, combined Indian, Persian, Greek, and Chinese design elements into a single towering timepiece, complete with a mechanical bird that chirped and dropped a small ball every half hour, and a rotating figure that struck a cymbal on the hour, all powered by a hidden bucket system that measured the slow, steady flow of water. Al-Jazari's careful, detailed technical drawings, showing precisely how gears, valves, and levers connected to produce each mechanical effect, represent some of the earliest and most sophisticated engineering documentation to survive from anywhere in the medieval world. And historians of technology consider several of his innovations, including a crank mechanism and a design anticipating the modern camshaft, genuinely foundational to the later development of mechanical engineering. Ideas that would eventually feed, centuries later and through many intermediate steps, into the machines of the European Industrial Revolution. Beyond Al-Jazari's playful court inventions, engineering across the Islamic world solved genuinely essential, practical problems on a massive scale. The Qanat system, an underground network of gently sloped tunnels originally developed in ancient Persia, but expanded and refined across the Islamic world from Morocco to Central Asia, carried water for many miles from underground aquifers in the mountains down to farming communities in dry lowland areas, all without the need for pumps, relying instead on gravity alone and remarkably precise surveying to maintain the correct gentle slope across enormous distances. Some qanats stretched for dozens of miles underground, dug and maintained by hand over generations, and many of them, remarkably, still supply water to communities in Iran and elsewhere today, more than 1,000 years after they were first excavated. Windmills, too, are first clearly documented in the historical record in the region of Persia in the 7th century, centuries before they appeared in Europe, used to grind grain and pump water using a vertical axis design suited to the strong, steady winds of that particular region. Water-powered mills, meanwhile, ground grain, pressed sugar cane, and even powered early industrial processes like paper manufacturing. The very paper mills, remember, that had helped spread the house of wisdom's translated knowledge so widely in the first place, closing another one of this story's quiet, satisfying loops. Rest now, my friend, and listen once more to that slow, patient creak of the water wheel, turning and turning through the warm afternoon, lifting water scoop by scoop up into the waiting fields. In our next chapter, we will look honestly at the gradual decline of this golden age, the complex mix of internal and external pressures that slowly dimmed its brightest lamps over the centuries that followed, and what, if anything, was truly lost. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 18, The Slow Dimming of the Lamps. Welcome back, my friend. Every long, bright day eventually softens into evening, and every civilization, however golden its noon, eventually experiences its own long, gradual dusk. Tonight, gently and honestly, we will talk about the slow dimming of this particular light, a process that historians still debate and discuss, because it was never a single event, never a single cause, but rather a slow accumulation of many smaller pressures over several centuries. We have already met one dramatic rupture, the Mongol destruction of Baghdad in 1258, and we saw that even this terrible blow did not end the civilization outright, since Cairo, Istanbul, Isfahan, and Delhi all continued to flourish for centuries afterward. So the story of decline is not simply a story of sudden catastrophe. It is a slower story, and historians point to several intertwined threads worth nomming gently, one by one, like beads on a string. One thread involves shifting global trade routes. For centuries, the Islamic world had occupied an extraordinarily privileged position at the crossroads of Asian, African, and European trade, and this position had generated much of the wealth that funded libraries, hospitals, and observatories. But beginning in the late 15th century, European sailors, particularly the Portuguese, began to develop the maritime skill and shipbuilding technology to sail directly around the southern tip of Africa to reach India and the Spice Islands by sea. Bypassing the overland and Red Sea routes that Middle Eastern merchants had long controlled. Vasco da Gama's voyage in 1498 was a quiet turning point, not immediately catastrophic, but gradually, over the following century, it diverted an increasing share of the lucrative spice trade away from Cairo and the Middle East and into the hands of European merchants sailing their own ships directly to source, slowly eroding one of the economic pillars that had funded this civilization's great cultural investments. A second thread involves internal political fragmentation and, at times, increasing rigidity within certain institutions of learning. Some historians argue that in certain regions and periods, religious and legal scholarship grew more conservative over time, less open to the kind of bold philosophical inquiry that thinkers like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ibn Rushd had once pursued so vigorously. This argument should be held gently and with some caution, my friend, because it has sometimes been overstated or oversimplified by later Western historians eager to draw a tidy contrast between a supposedly stagnant East and a supposedly progressive West. A framing many contemporary historians now consider too simple and, in places, unfair. Scientific and scholarly work continued across the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal empires for centuries after the so-called Classical Golden Age, including that remarkable Istanbul observatory we visited earlier, built as late as the 16th century. The picture, in truth, is uneven, varying considerably by region, by ruler, and by specific field of study, rather than a single simple slope of decline. A third thread, impossible to ignore, involves recurring waves of external military and political pressure. The Crusades, beginning in 1096 and continuing intermittently for roughly 2 centuries, brought repeated warfare to the Levant, disrupting cities and trade even as they also, ironically, increased certain forms of cultural contact and exchange between European Crusader states and their Muslim neighbors. Centuries later, the gradual expansion of European colonial power, beginning with Portuguese and Dutch inroads into the Indian Ocean trade, and eventually escalating into the much larger colonial projects of the 18th and 19th centuries, placed enormous new pressures on Islamic states, pressures that some of these states, weakened by their own internal challenges, struggled to resist. And a fourth thread, quieter but equally real, involves simple demographic and environmental hardship. Plague, which we glimpsed briefly in 14th century Cairo, swept repeatedly through the Islamic world just as it did through Europe and Asia, killing enormous numbers of people and disrupting the stable tax base, agricultural labor, and urban population density that had once supported such rich scholarly and artistic investment. But here, my friend, I want to offer you a gentler way of holding this whole chapter in your sleepy mind, because I think it is easy, when telling a story of decline, to make it sound as though a light simply switched off, and that is not really an accurate picture at all. Scholarship, art, and science continued across the Islamic world throughout the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, in forms that grew, changed, responded to new pressures, and often achieved their own remarkable heights, even as the specific, unusually concentrated brilliance of the 8th through 13th century classical Golden Age gradually gave way to other patterns of cultural and intellectual life. A civilization spanning so many centuries and so many lands does not simply end. It changes shape, the way a river changes shape as it widens and slows on its way toward the sea, without ever truly stopping its flow. Rest now, my friend, and let this chapter's honesty settle gently rather than heavily upon you, the way dusk settles without ever quite becoming true darkness all at once. In our next chapter, we will follow the quieter, more hopeful thread of this story, tracing exactly how the scientific and philosophical achievements of the Golden Age flowed onward into the European Renaissance, shaping the modern world in ways that are still, even now, often underappreciated. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 19, The Lantern Passed Onward. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight we follow a single, patient thread of light as it travels from the libraries of Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo into the universities of medieval and Renaissance Europe. A quiet, often underappreciated inheritance that shaped the modern world far more deeply than most people ever realize as they go about their ordinary days. We have already walked through Toledo together, my friend, and seen how Gerard of Cremona and his fellow translators carried Arabic scientific and philosophical texts into Latin. But let us linger a little longer on exactly what that inheritance contained, because the sheer breadth of it is worth resting on slowly. European medical students learned anatomy, pharmacology, and clinical diagnosis largely through Ibn Sina's canon of medicine for centuries. European astronomers built their models of the heavens on foundations laid by al-Battani, whose precise observations of the length of the solar year and the tilt of the Earth's axis were so accurate that Copernicus himself, many centuries later, cited al-Battani's work directly in his own revolutionary treatise proposing that the Earth orbits the Sun. European mathematicians learned algebra from al-Khwarizmi and trigonometry from scholars like al-Tusi and al-Biruni, whose careful geometric work on the relationships between angles and distances underpinned navigation, surveying, and astronomy alike. European scientists learned the experimental method itself, at least in part, from Ibn al-Haytham's patient, rigorous optics, and the very word we use for a chemical retort, alembic, descends from the Arabic al-inbic, the distillation vessel refined in those early alchemical workshops. Even ordinary words woven into everyday English carry this inheritance forward, quietly, invisibly, the way a river carries silt from a mountain 1,000 miles upstream without anyone downstream ever noticing. Algebra, algorithm, alcohol, alkali, azimuth, zenith, nadir, admiral, which comes from Amir al-Bar, commander of the sea, sugar, syrup, sofa, coffee, lemon, orange, all of these words, so ordinary now that we barely notice them, arrived in European languages from Arabic, each one a small, quiet monument to a much larger exchange of goods and ideas. And let us not forget, my friend, that this transmission was never simply a one-way handoff, a single delivery after which the original civilization had nothing further to offer. Scholars in the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal worlds continued their own scientific and philosophical work for centuries following the classical Golden Age, often in direct conversation and exchange with European science as it, too, began to develop its own new momentum from the 16th century onward. Ideas moved in both directions across the Mediterranean and beyond, carried by merchants, diplomats, and travelers, in a long, continuous conversation between civilizations that never truly stopped, even during periods of political conflict or war. Consider, too, my friend, a physician we have not yet properly met, Ibn al-Nafis, who lived and worked in 13th century Damascus and Cairo, and who described with remarkable clarity the pulmonary circulation of blood, the process by which blood travels from the heart to the lungs to be oxygenated before returning to the heart, correctly identifying that blood does not pass directly through an invisible pore between the two sides of the heart. As the ancient physician, Galen had long assumed, and as most physicians had continued to believe for well over 1,000 years. Ibn al-Nafis's insight would not become widely known in Europe until centuries later, and the European scientists William Harvey and Michael Servetus, working independently in the 16th and 17th centuries on the broader question of blood circulation, are far better remembered in most popular accounts of medical history. But historians of science increasingly recognize Ibn al-Nafis's earlier, careful anatomical reasoning as a genuinely important and often overlooked milestone on the road to our modern understanding of the human body. Rest with that thought for a moment, my friend. The quiet, patient work of correcting an error that had stood unquestioned for over 1,000 years, achieved not through some dramatic single experiment but through careful, repeated anatomical reasoning, passed down, copied, and eventually half forgotten before being rediscovered by later historians combing patiently back through old manuscripts. So much of history, my friend, is like this, a matter of someone, eventually, taking the trouble to look carefully back at what came before. Rest now, my friend, and picture that lantern, small and steady, passed from hand to hand across centuries and across seas, from Baghdad to Toledo, from Toledo to Paris and Oxford, its flame never quite going out, only changing hands, again and again, quietly, patiently, the way this whole story has been changing hands night after night between the two of us. In our next chapter, we will turn to philosophy more directly, meeting the great thinkers who tried to reconcile faith and reason across this long and thoughtful civilization. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 20. The Philosophers Who Loved Both Faith and Reason. Hello again, my friend. Tonight, let your mind grow quiet and spacious, because we are going to sit for a while with some of the deepest thinkers of this entire civilization, men who spent their lives asking questions that have no easy answers, questions about the nature of existence, the relationship between faith and reason, and what it truly means for a human being to know something at all. One of the earliest and most important of these philosophers was Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Kindi, working in 9th century Baghdad, often called the first true Islamic philosopher, in the sense of being the first major Muslim scholar to fully engage with Greek philosophical traditions and attempt to synthesize them with Islamic theology. Al-Kindi worked closely with the House of Wisdom's translation efforts and argued, with real conviction, that philosophy and religious truth were not enemies, but companions, both leading, by different paths, toward the same ultimate reality, and that a devout Muslim had nothing to fear and much to gain from studying Aristotle and Plato carefully and honestly. A century later, Abu Nasr al-Farabi, working in Baghdad and later in Aleppo and Damascus, extended this project further, becoming known across the Islamic world as the Second Teacher, a title that placed him, remarkably, second in authority only to Aristotle himself, the first teacher in the eyes of later scholars. Al-Farabi wrote extensively on logic, political philosophy, and metaphysics, developing an influential vision of an ideal virtuous city, clearly inspired by Plato's Republic, but reworked thoroughly through an Islamic philosophical lens, in which a wise, philosophically enlightened ruler guides a harmonious society toward genuine human flourishing, and ultimately toward a right relationship with the divine. We have already met Ibn Sina in our chapter on medicine, but his philosophical contributions deserve their own gentle pause here as well, my friend, because his work extended so far beyond medicine into deep questions of metaphysics. Ibn Sina developed an intricate and highly influential argument often called the proof of the truthful, for the existence of a necessary being, a being whose existence is not dependent on anything else, from which all other contingent, dependent things in the universe ultimately derive their existence. This argument would go on to influence not only later Islamic philosophy, but medieval Jewish and Christian philosophy as well, including, eventually, the work of Thomas Aquinas in 13th century Europe, who engaged seriously, if critically, with Ibn Sina's ideas as part of his own famous arguments for the existence of God. And we have met, too, the later dispute between al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd. But al-Ghazali deserves a fuller portrait of his own here, my friend, because his intellectual journey is one of the most personally moving in this entire story. Al-Ghazali, born in 1058 in Persia, achieved enormous success and prestige as a young scholar, eventually holding one of the most prestigious teaching positions in the entire Islamic world at the Nizamiya Madrasa in Baghdad. And yet, at the height of his career, he experienced what can only be described as a profound spiritual and intellectual crisis, a deep uncertainty about whether the rational, philosophical certainty he had built his reputation upon could ever truly deliver the kind of ultimate truth and peace he was searching for. Al-Ghazali abandoned his prestigious position entirely, left Baghdad, and spent years wandering as an ascetic, engaging in Sufi mystical practice, before eventually writing an extraordinary work of intellectual autobiography called Deliverance from Error, describing his long search through theology, philosophy, and mysticism for a foundation of certain knowledge he could truly trust. He eventually concluded that direct mystical experience, rather than philosophical argument alone, offered the most reliable path to genuine certainty about ultimate truth, though he continued, throughout the rest of his life, to write rigorously and carefully about logic, theology, and law, never abandoning reason so much as insisting that reason alone, without the deeper dimension of spiritual experience, could not complete the human search for meaning. Let these four thinkers rest together now in your mind, my friend. Al-Kindi opening the door, Al-Farabi building the house, Ibn Sina furnishing it with intricate metaphysical detail, and al-Ghazali, in the end, walking quietly out into the garden beyond it, searching for something reason alone could not fully provide. Together, across 2 centuries, they created one of the richest philosophical conversations in world history, a conversation about faith and reason that echoes, in different forms, in philosophy departments and theology seminars all over the world even today. Rest now, my friend, in the quiet, spacious stillness these philosophers spent their lives trying to reach. In our next chapter, we will turn to something a little more tangible again, the agricultural revolution that quietly transformed farms, diets, and daily life across the entire Islamic world, and eventually across Europe as well. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 21. The Green Revolution of an Older World. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, let us walk out of the city entirely, out past the markets and the mosques, into the quiet, fertile fields that fed this whole enormous civilization, because historians have come to recognize that one of the Golden Age's most sweeping and least celebrated achievements was a slow, patient transformation of agriculture itself, sometimes called by modern scholars the Islamic Green Revolution. As the early Islamic empires expanded, connecting Spain to India within a single, relatively open trading zone, crops that had once been confined to a single region began traveling widely along trade routes, and through the deliberate efforts of farmers and botanists eager to test whether a plant that thrived in one climate might also thrive in another. Rice, originally domesticated in Asia, spread westward into Persia, Iraq, and eventually Spain. Sugar cane, another Asian crop, spread across the Middle East and North Africa and into Spain as well, transforming what had once been an expensive, rare luxury, sugar, into a more widely available crop, grown on plantations that, in later centuries, would tragically become associated with brutal forced labor, both in the Islamic world and, even more extensively and horrifically, in the European colonial plantations of the Americas that followed this same crop across the Atlantic. Cotton spread widely as well, becoming a major textile crop across the region, and citrus fruits, oranges, lemons, and limes, originally native to South and Southeast Asia, found their way through Persia and the Arab world into North Africa and Spain, where they thrived in the Mediterranean climate and eventually gave the very word orange, by way of Arabic and Persian and Sanskrit, to English and other European languages. Eggplant, spinach, artichokes, watermelon, and bananas all traveled along these same routes, expanding the diets and the agricultural possibilities of an enormous stretch of the world. This expansion of crops depended, of course, on parallel advances in irrigation and water management. The qanats we visited in an earlier chapter, along with an expanding body of practical agricultural literature. Scholars like Ibn Basil and Al-Andalus, whom we met briefly in our chapter on Spain, along with Ibn al-Awwam, who compiled an enormously detailed agricultural treatise in 12th century Seville describing hundreds of plant varieties, grafting techniques, soil types, and pest management strategies, treated farming with the same careful, systematic, evidence-based attention that other scholars of this era brought to medicine or astronomy. These agricultural manuals were copied and studied for centuries, and some of their grafting and cultivation techniques remained standard practice in Mediterranean agriculture well into the modern era. This transformation changed more than farms, my friend. It changed diets, it changed cuisine, it changed the rhythms of daily life across an enormous stretch of the world, and it eventually changed European agriculture and cuisine too, as these same crops and techniques, along with so much else we have discussed, made their way north across the Mediterranean and the Pyrenees in the centuries following the Crusades and the Christian reconquest of Spain. The next time you eat rice, or squeeze a lemon into your tea, or add a spoonful of sugar to your coffee, you are tasting, in a very small and very literal way, my friend, a fragment of this old, patient agricultural inheritance, carried across 1,000 years and 1,000 miles by farmers whose names, almost entirely, we will never know. Rest now, my friend, here among the citrus groves and the rice paddies, the qanat water still running quietly somewhere beneath the soil. In our next chapter, we will follow the spread of Islam itself beyond the Middle East and North Africa into West Africa and East Africa, and across the Indian Ocean into Southeast Asia, carried not primarily by armies but by merchants, scholars, and Sufi mystics. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 22, Across Deserts and Oceans. Hello again, my friend. Tonight we follow the spread of this civilization's faith and culture into two very different landscapes, the vast, golden sands of West Africa and the warm, humid islands of Southeast Asia, carried in both cases not primarily by conquest, as it had first spread across the Middle East, but by something gentler, trade, and quiet persuasion. In West Africa, Islam arrived gradually, beginning around the 8th century, carried by Berber and Arab traders crossing the Sahara along routes that connected the Mediterranean coast to the fabulously wealthy gold-producing regions south of the desert. The Empire of Ghana, and later the even more famous Mali Empire, adopted Islam among their ruling classes over the following centuries, blending it with existing local traditions in ways that varied considerably from community to community. The Mali Empire produced one of history's most famous travelers in the opposite direction from Ibn Battuta, a ruler named Mansa Musa, who reigned in the early 14th century and who undertook a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 with a caravan so extraordinarily wealthy, reportedly including thousands of attendants and enormous quantities of gold, that his generous spending and gift-giving as he passed through Cairo is said to have actually depressed the value of gold in Egyptian markets for years afterward, an astonishing testament to the sheer scale of Mali's mineral wealth. Mansa Musa returned from his pilgrimage with scholars and architects, including the Andalusian poet and architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who helped design new mosques in the empire's cities. And under Mansa Musa's patronage, the city of Timbuktu grew into a genuinely renowned center of Islamic scholarship, its libraries eventually holding hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on subjects ranging from law and theology to astronomy and medicine, a West African echo, in its own distinct and vibrant form, of the House of Wisdom itself. Many of these Timbuktu manuscripts survive today, preserved by local families across generations, sometimes hidden in trunks or buried to protect them during periods of conflict. And in recent years, dedicated preservationists have worked urgently to digitize and protect this collection, especially after extremist groups threatened and destroyed some manuscripts during a period of conflict in Mali in 2012. A stark and painful reminder that the fragile work of preserving human knowledge, which we have followed across this entire story, remains, even now, an ongoing and sometimes dangerous task, never fully finished in any century. Let us drift now, my friend, across the whole breadth of the Indian Ocean, carried on the same monsoon winds that once carried Arab merchant dhows to Southeast Asia, where Islam arrived gradually beginning around the 13th century, spread primarily through trade contacts with Muslim merchants from India and Arabia, and through the quiet, patient work of Sufi teachers, who often blended Islamic teaching with existing local spiritual and cultural practices, in ways that allowed the faith to take root gradually and organically, rather than through conquest or coercion. The Sultanate of Malacca, founded in the early 15th century on the Malay Peninsula, became a major trading hub and a significant center for the spread of Islam throughout the wider Malay archipelago. And over the following centuries, Islam spread across what is now Indonesia, Malaysia, and the southern Philippines, blending with existing Hindu, Buddhist, and indigenous animist traditions in the region to create rich, distinct local expressions of Islamic culture, visible even today in the art, architecture, and customs of the region. Indonesia, remarkably, is home today to the largest Muslim population of any country in the world, a fact whose roots trace back precisely to these centuries of patient, merchant-carried, largely peaceful religious and cultural exchange across the Indian Ocean. What I find worth resting on, my friend, as we drift between these two very different stories, West African gold caravans and Southeast Asian spice ports, is how differently the same faith could travel and take root depending on the particular people, trade networks, and local cultures it encountered along the way, and how in both cases, it was not primarily armies but merchants, scholars, and quiet spiritual teachers who carried this civilization's ideas outward to the very edges of the known world. Rest now, my friend, somewhere between the golden sands of Timbuktu and the warm spice-scented harbors of Malacca, the whole wide arc of this civilization's reach settling gently over you like a great, soft map unfolding in the dark. In our next chapter, we will return to Spain one final time, to witness the slow ending of Muslim rule there, and to consider what was carried away and what was left behind when that particular chapter finally closed. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 23, The Last Light of Granada. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight we return one final time to Spain to watch the slow, centuries-long sunset of Muslim rule there, a sunset that took so long to fall, in fact, that it makes our earlier image of a single dramatic dusk feel much too simple. The story of Al-Andalus did not end quickly. It faded kingdom by kingdom, city by city, across nearly 800 years. After the powerful Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba collapsed in the early 11th century, Al-Andalus fragmented into a patchwork of smaller kingdoms known as the Taifa states, each ruled by its own local dynasty, some remarkably cultured and artistically ambitious, even as they competed and occasionally warred with one another. This fragmentation left the Taifa states more vulnerable to the slowly advancing Christian kingdoms of the north, Castile, Aragon, and others, whose gradual, centuries-long campaign of reconquest historians call the Reconquista. At various points, North African dynasties, first the Almoravids and later the Almohads, crossed into Spain to support the Taifa states and temporarily reunified Muslim rule there, bringing with them their own distinct artistic and religious traditions. But the long-term momentum, across the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, moved steadily in favor of the Christian kingdoms. Major cities fell one after another. Toledo in 1085, the very city whose libraries would soon become so crucial to European learning, Cordoba in 1236, Seville in 1248, until, by the mid-13th century, only a single Muslim kingdom remained, tucked into the mountainous southern region around Granada. The Nasrid dynasty ruled this last kingdom of Granada for over 2 centuries, from 1232 to 1492, a remarkably long survival achieved partly through skillful diplomacy, sometimes paying tribute to the more powerful Christian kingdom of Castile, and partly through Granada's defensible mountainous terrain. And it was during this long final chapter, strangely and beautifully, that some of Al-Andalus's most exquisite art and architecture was produced, most famously the Alhambra, the hilltop palace and fortress complex overlooking the city of Granada, whose delicate carved stucco walls, seeming almost too fine and lace-like to be made of stone at all, whose reflecting pools and courtyards, especially the famous Court of the Lions with its ring of slender marble columns, represent perhaps the single most refined expression of the entire Andalusian architectural tradition, built even as the political ground beneath it was slowly, inexorably crumbling. There is something worth resting on gently here, my friend, this strange, quiet human tendency to create some of our most exquisite beauty precisely in seasons of ending, as though awareness of an approaching sunset can sometimes sharpen, rather than dull, our attention to loveliness. The poets of Nasrid Granada wrote verses, some of them carved directly into the walls of the Alhambra itself, that speak with unusual tenderness about beauty, mortality, and the passage of time, verses that visitors can still read today, carved in flowing Arabic script across walls built by craftsmen who likely sensed, even as they worked, that they were creating something for an ending as much as for a future. In January of 1492, the same year that a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus would set sail westward across the Atlantic under the patronage of the same Spanish crown, the last Nasrid Sultan, Mohammed XII, known to history as Boabdil, surrendered Granada to the combined forces of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, ending nearly 800 years of Muslim political presence in the Iberian Peninsula. Legend holds that as Boabdil rode away from the city for the final time, he paused at a mountain pass to look back one last time at Granada and wept, and that his own mother said to him, with words that have echoed through Spanish and Arabic literature ever since, that he did well to weep like a woman for what he could not defend like a man. The pass is still known today, in local tradition, as El Ultimo Suspiro del Moro, the last sigh of the Moor. In the years that followed, the Muslim and Jewish communities that remained in Spain faced escalating pressure, forced conversion, and eventually, in the early 17th century, mass expulsion, a genuinely painful and often overlooked chapter of European history, closing this particular door almost entirely after centuries of complex, imperfect, but genuinely productive coexistence. Many of those expelled carried their culture, their crafts, and their memories southward across the strait into North Africa, where descendant communities preserved fragments of Andalusian music, cuisine, and tradition that persist, in altered form, even today. Rest now, my friend, at that mountain pass above Granada, the white walls of the Alhambra glowing faintly pink in the last light of a very long sunset, nearly 8 centuries in the setting. In our next chapter, We will turn to the great libraries and the culture of the book itself, considering just how precious, how carefully guarded, and how widely shared written knowledge became across this entire civilization, and how paper quietly changed everything. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 24: A Civilization Built on Paper and Ink. Hello again, my friend. Tonight, let us think quietly about paper, humble paper, thin and pale and so easily taken for granted. Because I promised you earlier that this simple material was one of the hidden engines driving this entire golden age forward, and I think it deserves a fuller telling of its own. Before paper reached the Islamic world, writing materials were expensive and often difficult to produce at scale. Papyrus, made from a reed plant that grew primarily in Egypt, was serviceable but brittle and became increasingly costly as demand grew and supply became less reliable. Parchment, made from carefully prepared animal skin, was durable and beautiful, but required the hide of an entire animal to produce only a modest number of pages, making large books, especially the kind of vast, systematic encyclopedic works that Ibn Sina and others would eventually write, extraordinarily expensive to produce. Paper-making technology, developed originally in China many centuries earlier, reached the Islamic world, as we mentioned briefly before, following the Battle of Talas in 751, near the border of modern Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, where Abbasid forces defeated a Chinese Tang army, and according to a story repeated by several later Arabic and Persian historians. Captured Chinese prisoners, who possessed the closely guarded knowledge of how to manufacture paper from cellulose fiber, typically derived from linen and cotton rags. Whether this transmission happened in precisely the dramatic manner the old stories describe or through gentler, more gradual channels of trade and craft exchange, paper making spread rapidly through the Islamic world in the following decades, with a paper mill established in Baghdad itself by the 790s, and the craft spreading onward from there to Damascus, Cairo, Fez, and eventually, by the 12th century, into Muslim Spain, from where it would finally reach Christian Europe. The effect of cheap, plentiful paper on this civilization's intellectual life is genuinely difficult to overstate, my friend. Books that would once have required the hides of dozens of animals could now be copied more cheaply and in greater numbers, and this abundance fed directly into one of this civilization's most distinctive institutions, the Great Library. Baghdad alone, at various points in its history, is said to have housed dozens of libraries, some attached to the House of Wisdom, others privately funded by wealthy patrons or attached to individual mosques and madrasas. Cairo's Fatimid-era Dar al-Ilm, the House of Knowledge, founded in the early 11th century, reportedly held over 1 million volumes at its height, along with reading rooms open to scholars of every background who wished to study there, an extraordinary scale of accessible public knowledge for any era, let alone the 11th century. Booksellers, too, occupied an honored and often lucrative profession across the Islamic world, with entire market districts, such as the famous Suq al-Warakin, the stationer's market in Baghdad, dedicated to the copying, binding, and selling of manuscripts, employing armies of professional scribes who could copy a text with remarkable speed and accuracy, and whose careful, beautiful handwriting we should remember from our earlier chapter on calligraphy, was itself considered a genuine art form. Wealthy patrons competed to commission finely illustrated and bound manuscripts, while more affordable, simply copied texts allowed ordinary students and scholars of more modest means to build their own personal libraries as well. This culture of books and libraries proved, sadly, tragically fragile in the face of conflict, as we saw in the burning of Baghdad's libraries during the Mongol conquest, and as we saw again in the threatened Timbuktu manuscripts in more recent history. And yet, remarkably, an enormous quantity of manuscripts from this era did survive, scattered across libraries and private collections from Morocco to India to Europe. And modern scholars and librarians continue, even now in the present day, to catalog, digitize, and study manuscripts that have not been read carefully by anyone in centuries, occasionally discovering genuinely significant lost or forgotten works tucked away, unnoticed, on some quiet shelf. The Süleymaniye Library in Istanbul, the libraries of Fez and Cairo, the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin, and countless other institutions around the world today hold treasures from this civilization that scholars are, quite literally, still in the process of fully understanding. Rest now, my friend, among these silent shelves, dust motes drifting slowly through a shaft of afternoon light falling across rows and rows of leather-bound manuscripts, each one holding, quietly, patiently, a small fragment of some long-dead scholar's careful, curious mind. In our next chapter, we will lift our eyes to the stars once more, this time to consider the many stars in our modern night sky that still carry Arabic names today, a quiet, glittering reminder written permanently across the heavens themselves. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 25. Names written across the night sky. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, let us lie back and look upward, all the way up, past the rooftops and the minarets and the mountain passes we have wandered through together, into the open night sky itself, because scattered across that sky, in plain sight, quietly overlooked by most people who glance up at them, are hundreds of stars still bearing the Arabic names given to them by the astronomers we met so many chapters ago. Consider Aldebaran, the bright orange eye of the constellation Taurus, whose name comes from the Arabic al-Dabaran, meaning the follower, because it appears to follow the star cluster known as the Pleiades across the night sky. Consider Betelgeuse, that great, dying red giant marking the shoulder of Orion, whose name traces back to a slightly garbled transliteration of the Arabic Yad al-Jawza, roughly meaning the hand of the giant. Consider Rigel, marking Orion's foot from the Arabic Rail al-Jawza, the giant's foot. Consider Altair in the constellation Aquila from al-Nasr al-Tair, the flying eagle, and Vega from al-Nasr al-Waki, the falling eagle, two great stars whose Arabic names both invoke the image of an eagle in flight or at rest, mirrored across the summer sky. Consider Deneb, the tail of the swan from Daneb, meaning tail. Consider Fomalhaut from Fam al-Hut, the mouth of the fish. Consider Algol in the constellation Perseus, whose Arabic name, Ras al-Ghul, meaning the demon's head or the ghoul's head, reflects an ancient observation, later explained scientifically, that this particular star flickers and dims periodically, a behavior astronomers now understand results from an eclipsing binary star system, two stars orbiting one another so that one periodically passes in front of the other from our vantage point on Earth, but which appeared, to careful ancient observers without any telescope at all, unsettling enough to earn a name meaning demon. Think about that for a moment, my friend, if your sleepy mind can hold the thought gently. Astronomers working 1,000 years ago, without telescopes, without any of our modern instruments, noticed with the naked eye alone that this one particular star behaved differently from its neighbors, dimming and brightening on a regular, careful rhythm, and they gave it a name reflecting genuine, patient, repeated observation. Their careful naming survives not in some dusty museum case, but painted directly across the living sky itself, visible tonight, wherever you are, if the clouds happen to part and the light happens to be dark enough. Even the very language we use to describe the sky carries this inheritance. The word azimuth, used by navigators and astronomers to describe the compass direction of a celestial object, comes from the Arabic al-Sumat, the paths or directions. The word nadir, describing the point in the sky directly opposite the zenith, straight down through the earth from wherever you stand, comes from the Arabic nazir, meaning opposite. Even the names of many of our modern star catalogs and constellation systems were built directly upon translated Greek and Islamic astronomical texts, so thoroughly blended together across the centuries that untangling exactly which name came from which culture requires careful historical detective work. So tonight, my friend, if you find yourself outside on some future clear night looking up, I want you to remember this small, quiet fact, that a great many of the stars you can see, without any device at all beyond your own eyes, still carry the careful, patient names given to them by scholars working in Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba, 1,000 years ago and more. Scholars who spent their whole lives training their attention on tiny points of light, and who left their careful, patient fingerprints permanently across the heavens themselves. Rest now, my friend, beneath that whole wide sky, Aldebaran following the Pleiades, Vega and Altair facing one another silently across the summer stars, Algol flickering its slow, ancient rhythm somewhere in Perseus. In our next chapter, we will come back down to Earth one more time, to the later Ottoman world, and consider how this great empire, the last of the three crescents we met earlier, gradually transformed, reformed, and eventually gave way to the modern nations of the Middle East. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 26, The Long Ottoman Afternoon. Hello again, my friend. Let us return now to Istanbul, to the Ottoman Empire we visited earlier at the height of Suleiman the Magnificent's 16th century glory, and follow its long, eventful afternoon across the centuries that followed, because this empire's story stretched on for hundreds of years more, through triumph and reform and eventually gradual decline, closing only in the early 20th century, far closer to our own time than most of the other chapters we have told together. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, the Ottoman Empire remained one of the most powerful and sophisticated states in the world, controlling vast territories across southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, administering an extraordinarily diverse population of different ethnicities and religions through a system that granted significant internal autonomy to different religious communities, known as millets, allowing Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities alike to govern many of their own internal affairs, their own courts, schools, and religious institutions, under the broader umbrella of Ottoman imperial authority. But by the 18th and especially the 19th centuries, the Ottoman Empire found itself facing mounting internal and external pressures not unlike, in some ways, the pressures we discussed earlier regarding the broader decline of the classical Golden Age, but now compounded by the rapidly accelerating military and industrial power of European states following their own industrial revolution. Russia pushed steadily southward against Ottoman territory in the Black Sea region. European powers extended growing economic and political influence over Ottoman finances and internal affairs. Nationalist movements began to stir among various ethnic and religious groups within the empire's vast territories, seeking independence or greater autonomy. Ottoman rulers and reformers responded, across the 19th century, with a series of ambitious modernization efforts known as the Tanzimat reforms, restructuring the military, the legal system, and the administrative bureaucracy along more centralized, European-inspired lines, expanding secular education, and attempting to grant greater legal equality to non-Muslim subjects within the empire. These reforms achieved real successes in some areas, yet ultimately could not fully reverse the empire's relative decline in military and economic power compared to an increasingly industrialized Europe. The final chapter of Ottoman history unfolded amid the catastrophe of the First World War, in which the empire, allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, suffered devastating military defeats, and in its final years, the empire's Armenian population endured a genocide of horrifying scale and brutality, a tragedy that remains, even today, a subject of painful historical reckoning, and in some quarters, ongoing political dispute regarding its formal recognition. Following the war's end in 1918, the Ottoman Empire was dismantled entirely, its territories divided among the victorious European powers or reorganized into new nation-states. And in 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate itself was formally abolished by Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, who went on to found the modern, secular Republic of Turkey in 1923, followed shortly after by the formal abolition of the Caliphate itself in 1924. Ending after nearly 13 centuries, stretching all the way back to Abu Bakr in the year 632, the institution of the Caliphate that had, in one form or another, stood at the symbolic center of so much of the story we have told together across these many chapters. Let that fact settle over you gently, my friend, without alarm, simply as a marker of how very long this story truly is. 13 centuries, from a small, uncertain community gathered around a single leader in 7th century Arabia, through the round city of Baghdad, through Cordoba and Cairo and Istanbul, all the way to a formal declaration in a parliament building in Ankara in 1924, quietly closing a chapter that had opened nearly 1,300 years earlier. Empires end, my friend, the way long days end, slowly, gradually, and this particular ending, unlike the sudden violence of the Mongol sack of Baghdad, came instead through the equally powerful, equally history-altering forces of modern nationalism, industrialization, and total war. Rest now, my friend, here at the closing of this long Ottoman afternoon, the light fading gently rather than being suddenly extinguished, new nations rising quietly from the empire's vast former territories like new candles being lit as an old one finally, gently, burns down to its final inch. In our next chapter, we will look at what became of this civilization's scientific and intellectual inheritance in the modern era, and how contemporary scholars, artists, and scientists across the Muslim world continue to draw upon, reinterpret, and extend this extraordinarily long tradition today. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 27. The Modern Heirs of an Old Flame. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, let us step forward through the centuries all at once, past the fall of empires, past the closing of the Caliphate, into our own recent era, to see how the long, patient flame we have followed together did not, in the end, simply gutter out with the old empires that once carried it, but instead kept passing quietly from hand to hand, right up into our own lifetimes. In 1979, the physicist Abdus Salam, born in a small town in what is now Pakistan, became the first Muslim to win a Nobel Prize in the sciences, sharing the Nobel Prize in physics for his work on the unification of the electromagnetic and weak nuclear forces, a foundational contribution to what physicists now call the Standard Model, the deep mathematical description of how the smallest particles in the universe interact with one another. Salam remained, throughout his life, deeply engaged with the history we have told together across these chapters, often speaking publicly about the achievements of al-Khwarizmi, Ibn al-Haytham, and Ibn Sina, and he devoted much of his later career to founding the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, Italy, specifically to support scientists from developing countries, wanting to help rebuild, in some small way, the kind of open, well-resourced scientific community that Baghdad and Cordoba had once provided the whole world centuries earlier. In 1999, the chemist Ahmed Zewail, born in Egypt, won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for developing femtochemistry, a technique using extraordinarily short laser pulses, measured in quadrillionths of a second, to observe the very moment atoms rearrange themselves during a chemical reaction, watching, in effect, the fastest events in the universe as they unfold. Zewail spoke often of feeling a personal connection to the long tradition of Jabir ibn Hayyan and the alchemist's workshops we visited together, a tradition of patient, curious experimentation stretching back, in an unbroken thread of human curiosity, more than 1,000 years before his own laboratory work at Caltech. Contemporary architects, too, continue drawing on this deep well of tradition. The Turkish-American architect Zaha Hadid, born in Baghdad in 1950, became one of the most celebrated and influential architects in the world, her flowing, curvilinear buildings appearing in cities across the globe. And though her style looked resolutely toward the future rather than backward toward historical ornament, she spoke often of how the geometric abstraction and mathematical sophistication of traditional Islamic architecture, the very star patterns and interlocking tilework we admired together in an earlier chapter, had shaped her earliest sense of what architecture could be. Across the Muslim-majority world today, universities, research institutions, and cultural organizations continue producing scholarship, science, and art of every kind, in every field continuing a tradition that, as we discussed honestly a few chapters back, never truly stopped, even during its quieter centuries. Museums in Doha, in Kuala Lumpur, in Istanbul, and in London now hold and display, with growing scholarly care, some of the manuscripts, instruments, and artworks we have discussed together throughout this whole long story, making them newly accessible to visitors and researchers from every corner of the globe, much as the old libraries of Baghdad and Cairo once made translated Greek philosophy accessible to scholars of every background who cared enough to come and read. Rest now, my friend, and let this whole long chain settle gently into your mind, from Al-Khwarizmi's quiet room in 9th century Baghdad, all the way to a laser laboratory in modern California, all the way to a flowing, curved museum roof rising somewhere in a city being built even now in our own time. The flame never went out, my friend. It simply kept moving, kept changing hands, the way this whole story has been changing hands between us, night after night. Chapter 28, Saladin and the Age of the Crusades. Welcome back again, my friend, or perhaps still with me from before, drifting gently onward. Let us step backward in time once more to the 12th century to tell a story we set aside earlier, of a long, difficult era of warfare between the Crusader states of Europe and the Muslim rulers of the Levant, and of one particular leader whose name became legendary on both sides of that long conflict. In 1096, the First Crusade set out from Western Europe, called by Pope Urban II, with the stated aim of recapturing Jerusalem and the holy sites of the Levant from Muslim rule. The Crusaders succeeded in capturing Jerusalem in 1099, in a siege remembered in both Muslim and Christian chronicles of the time, for its considerable brutality, and they established a series of Crusader states along the eastern Mediterranean coast that would persist, in various forms, for nearly 2 centuries. Into this long, difficult conflict stepped a Kurdish military leader named Yusuf ibn Ayyub, better known to history as Salah al-Din, or Saladin, who rose through the ranks of Muslim military and political leadership in Egypt and Syria during the mid-12th century, eventually uniting Egypt and much of Syria under a single unified command, a political achievement nearly as significant as his later military victories, since Muslim political fragmentation had, until that point, allowed the smaller Crusader states to persist far longer than they otherwise might have. In 1187, Saladin's forces decisively defeated a Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin, near the Sea of Galilee, and soon afterward recaptured Jerusalem itself, ending 88 years of Crusader control over the city. What followed distinguished Saladin's reputation for centuries afterward, on both sides of the conflict, because rather than repeating the brutality of the original 1099 Crusader conquest, Saladin allowed the city's Christian population to leave peacefully, in many cases paying a modest ransom, and preserved churches and holy sites rather than destroying them, a measured, deliberate act of restraint that earned him lasting respect even among many of his European adversaries. The Third Crusade followed in response to Jerusalem's fall, led in part by King Richard I of England, known as Richard the Lionheart, and though the two leaders, Saladin and Richard, never actually met face to face, their exchanges of gifts, letters, and on occasion, physicians during periods of negotiation and truce became the stuff of enduring legend, two respected adversaries locked in genuine, difficult conflict, yet capable even amid war of a kind of mutual chivalric respect that medieval European chroniclers found remarkable enough to record and preserve. Eventually, a treaty was signed in 1192 that left Jerusalem under Muslim control, while guaranteeing Christian pilgrims continued access to the city's holy sites, a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but that ended, for a time, the active fighting. Saladin died the following year, in 1193, in Damascus, and it is said that when his personal treasurer went to arrange funds for his burial, he discovered that Saladin's personal treasury held almost nothing, since he had spent his wealth so generously on his soldiers, on charity, and on the ordinary needs of his people, that there was barely enough remaining to cover his own funeral expenses. Rest with that image for a moment, my friend, a great and feared military commander, victorious in some of the most consequential battles of the medieval world, who died with an almost empty purse because he had given nearly everything away. The Crusades continued in various further waves for another century after Saladin's death, gradually diminishing in their success as Muslim states in the region, eventually including the Mamluks we met in an earlier chapter, systematically reclaimed the remaining Crusader territories, until the last major Crusader stronghold, the city of Acre, fell in 1291, finally closing this particular two-century chapter of the story, though its echoes, its legends, and its long shadow over relations between the Muslim world and Europe would linger for centuries afterward, and in some ways, arguably, still linger today. Rest now, my friend, here in the quiet aftermath of that long conflict, Saladin's near-empty treasury a strange, gentle counterpoint to all the war and bloodshed that surrounded his life. In our next chapter, we will visit Jerusalem itself, the walled city so central to this whole difficult history, and consider its long, layered life as a sacred space shared, however imperfectly across the centuries among three faiths. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 29, Jerusalem, City of Three Faiths. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight let us walk together through the old, walled heart of Jerusalem, a city so thoroughly layered with sacred meaning, for so many different people across so many centuries, that a single visit can feel almost like walking through several different overlapping stories at once, each one true, each one held dearly by someone. When Muslim armies first took control of Jerusalem in the year 637, under the Caliph Umar, the second successor to the Prophet Muhammad, the city's Christian patriarch Sophronius is said to have negotiated the terms of surrender personally with Umar, and Umar, upon entering the city, is remembered in later accounts for declining to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre when the moment for prayer arrived, choosing instead to pray outside, specifically so that future generations of Muslims would not use his prayer there as a pretext to claim the church for a mosque. Whether every detail of this story reflects precise historical fact or has been softened and shaped by later, more idealized retelling, it captures an aspiration, at least, toward a kind of careful, deliberate coexistence that this city would spend the following centuries only imperfectly, unevenly, but sometimes genuinely achieving. Jerusalem holds deep significance for Islam because of the Quranic account of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey, known as the Isra and Miraj, in which he is described as having traveled miraculously in a single night from Mecca to Jerusalem, and from there ascended briefly through the heavens before returning. To commemorate this event, the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik commissioned the construction of the Dome of the Rock, completed in the year 691, built atop the same elevated rocky outcrop that Jewish tradition identifies as the location of the ancient temple's Holy of Holies, and that Islamic tradition associates with the site of the Prophet's ascension. The Dome of the Rock remains, to this day, one of the oldest surviving works of Islamic architecture anywhere in the world. Its golden dome and its stunning interior mosaics of vines, jewels, and flowing calligraphy, representing an extraordinarily early and sophisticated statement of Islamic artistic identity, built at a time when the young faith was still working out exactly what its own distinct visual language would look like. Nearby stands the Al-Aqsa Mosque, also built during the early Umayyad period and expanded by later rulers, together with the Dome of the Rock forming the sacred precinct known in Arabic as Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, considered the third holiest site in Islam after Mecca and Medina. This same elevated platform, of course, sits immediately above and adjacent to the Western Wall, the last remaining retaining wall of the ancient Jewish Second Temple, making this single, relatively compact plot of land one of the most densely layered and, at times, most fiercely contested sacred spaces on the entire planet, a place where the deep spiritual devotion of three separate world religions converges, sometimes in harmony and sometimes across the long history of this city. In painful and difficult conflict, Jerusalem changed hands several more times across the medieval centuries we have already discussed, captured by the First Crusade in 1099, recaptured by Saladin in 1187, contested further in subsequent crusades, before eventually settling under stable Muslim rule for many centuries, first under the Mamluks and later under the Ottomans, whose Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, rebuilt the city's walls in the 16th century. Walls that still largely define the boundaries of Jerusalem's Old City today. Throughout these Ottoman centuries, Jerusalem remained home to significant Christian and Jewish communities alongside its Muslim majority, each maintaining their own quarters, institutions, and holy sites within the compact, walled Old City, a pattern of layered coexistence, imperfect but persistent, echoing the broader story of convivencia we touched upon in Andalusian, Spain many chapters ago. Jerusalem's more recent history, following the collapse of Ottoman rule after the First World War, through British colonial administration, and into the complex, often painful modern conflicts surrounding the city's status, extends well beyond the scope of what we can gently cover in a single sleepy chapter tonight, my friend, and touches upon living, ongoing political questions that remain deeply, sometimes painfully unresolved even today. I want to be honest with you about that rather than pretend the story simply concluded peacefully centuries ago. What I can say, resting gently here at the end of this particular chapter, is that this small, walled city's long history demonstrates, again and again, both how beautifully different peoples and faiths can sometimes share a single sacred landscape, and how painfully difficult that sharing can become when trust breaks down, a tension this city seems to hold, quite literally, in its very stones. Rest now, my friend, here within Jerusalem's old walls, golden light catching the Dome of the Rock at sunset the way it has for over 13 centuries now. In our next chapter, let us turn to something warmer and gentler for a while, the story of a small, dark, fragrant bean, and how it traveled from a mountainside in East Africa into every corner of the modern world. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 30, The Bean That Traveled the World. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight's chapter is a warmer, cozier one, so let your shoulders soften even further, because we are going to follow the story of a small, unassuming bean whose fragrant, bitter brew eventually conquered the entire world, one patient cup at a time. Coffee's exact origins are wrapped in legend more than precise historical record, but the most enduring story tells of an Ethiopian goat herder named Kaldi, who noticed, sometime around the 9th century, that his goats became unusually energetic after eating the bright red berries of a certain wild shrub growing on the hillsides. Whether or not Kaldi himself ever truly existed, coffee cultivation and consumption clearly developed in the highlands of Ethiopia and, significantly, in Yemen, just across the narrow strait of the Red Sea, where Sufi mystics in the 15th century began brewing coffee specifically to help them stay alert through long nights of prayer and devotional recitation, a use that feels almost gently ironic, my friend. Given that we are drinking in this whole story tonight specifically, to fall asleep rather than to stay awake. From Yemen, coffee drinking spread rapidly across the wider Islamic world during the 15th and 16th centuries, reaching Mecca, where it briefly faced religious controversy and even periodic bans from local authorities concerned about its stimulant effects and about the social gatherings that grew up around its consumption, before ultimately being embraced and legitimized as a permissible pleasure. Coffee houses, known as kahve-khane in Persian-influenced regions, began appearing in cities across the Ottoman Empire, Damascus, Cairo, and especially Istanbul, where the very first true coffee houses in that city opened in the 1550s, quickly becoming beloved centers of urban social life. Picture one of these early Ottoman coffee houses with me now, my friend, a warm, dim room, cushions scattered along low benches, the rich smell of roasting and brewing coffee filling the air, patrons gathered to play chess and backgammon, listen to musicians and storytellers, discuss poetry, politics, and gossip, all lubricated by small cups of thick, sweet coffee, sipped slowly across an entire unhurried afternoon or evening. These coffee houses became, in cities across the Ottoman world, genuinely important centers of social and even political life, so influential in shaping public opinion and occasionally fostering dissent that Ottoman authorities periodically attempted, usually without lasting success, to close them down or restrict their operation, worried about the free flow of conversation and criticism that tended to bubble up wherever people gathered comfortably together for long, unhurried hours. Coffee reached Europe gradually across the 16th and 17th centuries, carried by Venetian traders who maintained close commercial contact with the Ottoman world. And by the mid-17th century, coffee houses had opened in London, Paris, and Vienna, quickly becoming, much as they had in the Ottoman world, important centers of intellectual and commercial exchange. London's earliest coffee houses became meeting places for merchants, scientists, and writers, with one particular coffee house, run by a man named Edward Lloyd, eventually growing into the insurance market still known today as Lloyd's of London, born directly from merchants and ship owners gathering over coffee to discuss and insure against the risks of their maritime voyages. Vienna's coffeehouse culture, meanwhile, is often traced, through a charming though somewhat contested legend, to supplies of coffee left behind by a retreating Ottoman army following the failed 1683 siege of Vienna, giving the city, quite unexpectedly, one of its most beloved and enduring cultural traditions. Even our modern English word coffee traces this same journey, arriving in English by way of the Italian caf, itself derived from the Ottoman Turkish kav, which in turn came from the Arabic kawa, an older word that originally referred, interestingly enough, to wine, before being repurposed to describe this warming new beverage that, unlike wine, carried no prohibition within Islamic tradition. Rest now, my friend, in the warm, fragrant hush of an old Ottoman coffee house, cushions soft beneath you, the low murmur of quiet conversation, and the gentle click of backgammon pieces drifting through the dim, lamplit room. In our next chapter, we will look more closely at exactly those games, chess and backgammon, and how they traveled across this civilization on their own long, patient journey from India to the courts of Europe. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 31: Games of Kings and Quiet Minds. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, let us settle down beside a small, worn wooden board, its squares alternating light and dark, and follow the quiet journey of chess as it traveled from India, through Persia, through the wider Islamic world, and finally into Europe, changing gently in character with each new culture that welcomed it. Chess originated in India, most historians agree, sometime around the 6th century, under the name Chaturanga, a game modeling the 4 divisions of an ancient Indian army: infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots. From India, the game traveled to Persia, where it became known as Chaturanga, adopted enthusiastically by the Sassanid Persian court, and where a famous, oft-repeated legend describes an Indian king sending the game to a Persian king as a kind of intellectual challenge, daring the Persian court's wisest scholars to work out the rules purely through observation, a challenge the Persians, according to the legend, met successfully within 3 days. When Arab Muslim armies conquered Persia in the 7th century, they encountered chess already flourishing within Persian court culture, and the game, along with so much else we have already discussed from Persian civilization, was absorbed enthusiastically into the broader culture of the expanding Islamic world, its name shifting gently from Chaturanga to Shatranj. Islamic scholars took the game remarkably seriously as an intellectual pursuit, writing detailed treatises analyzing opening strategies, cataloging famous endgame positions, and debating the finer points of tactics with the same rigorous, systematic attention that other scholars of this era brought to mathematics or law. The game was played at the highest levels of Abbasid court society, and several caliphs, including Harun al-Rashid, whom we met in an earlier chapter, were known to be enthusiastic players and patrons of skilled chess masters, some of whom achieved genuine celebrity status at court, comparable in a way to grandmasters in our own modern chess world. One especially skilled 9th century player, al-Suli, was remembered for centuries afterward as a benchmark of chess excellence, with later players and writers using the phrase "as good as al-Suli" as a term of the highest praise for exceptional skill. Chess traveled onward from the Islamic world into Europe through several routes, through Muslim Spain, through Sicily, and through returning crusaders and merchants who encountered the game during their travels in the Levant, arriving in Europe by around the 10th century and spreading gradually across the continent over the following centuries. As it settled into European culture, the game slowly transformed, its pieces gradually renamed and reimagined to reflect European medieval society, the Persian vizier piece transforming, over time, into the queen, eventually gaining, in the 15th century, the sweeping, powerful movement across the entire board that makes the modern queen the single most powerful piece on the board, an evolution that happened gradually across Europe, well after the game's Islamic era of dominance. Alongside chess, backgammon, an even older game with roots stretching back to ancient Mesopotamia and Persia, similarly flourished across the Islamic world under the name Nard, and various card games and other games of strategy and chance developed and spread through the same rich cultural exchange, carried along the same trade routes, played in the same coffee houses we visited in our previous chapter, providing this whole civilization, alongside all of its serious scholarship and its magnificent architecture, with countless quiet hours of simple, patient, thoughtful pleasure. Rest now, my friend, beside that worn wooden board. The pieces settled quietly in their positions, a game paused mid-thought, waiting patiently to be finished another day. In our next chapter, we will turn to the kitchen and the rich, fragrant world of cuisine that this civilization produced and shared with the world. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 32, The Art of Taste. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, let the smell of warm spices drift gently through your imagination, cinnamon and cardamom, saffron and rosewater, as we step into the kitchens of this long, rich civilization, where cooking itself was treated, much like calligraphy or garden design, as a genuine and carefully cultivated art form. In 10th century Baghdad, a scholar and gastronome named Ibn Sayyar al-Warraq compiled a remarkable cookbook, known as Kitab al-Tabak, the Book of Dishes, gathering together recipes attributed to caliphs, poets, and physicians alike, along with poems celebrating the pleasures of good food and detailed instructions for preparing everything from delicate almond pastries to elaborate spiced meat dishes, offering modern historians an extraordinarily rich window into the flavors and dining customs of Abbasid Baghdad at the height of its glory. This is, remarkably, one of the oldest surviving cookbooks in world history, predating most European cookbooks by several centuries, and it reveals a cuisine already remarkably sophisticated, balancing sweet and savory flavors, using rosewater and orange blossom water for delicate fragrance, and employing a spice palette drawing on trade goods from across the known world: pepper from India, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, saffron cultivated locally in Persia. The agricultural transformations we discussed several chapters ago, rice, sugar, citrus, eggplant, all flowed directly into this evolving cuisine, and dishes developed across the Abbasid, Andalusian, Ottoman, Persian, and Mughal courts alike began to establish culinary traditions that persist in recognizable form right up to the present day. Think of the layered, syrup-soaked pastry we now call baklava, refined to its familiar form within Ottoman palace kitchens, its delicate phyllo layers requiring years of training for a pastry chef to master. Think of pilaf, rice cooked carefully in seasoned broth, a dish that spread from Persia across the entire region and beyond, taking on countless regional variations, each community adding its own particular blend of spices, nuts, and dried fruits. Think of the thick, sweetened yogurt drinks and the delicate rosewater-scented milk puddings still served today across Iran, Turkey, and the broader Middle East, virtually unchanged in spirit from descriptions recorded 1,000 years ago. Sherbet, too, deserves a gentle mention here. My friend, a cooling drink made of fruit juice, sugar, and sometimes rosewater or snow carried down carefully, at great expense, from distant mountaintops to cool the drinks of wealthy patrons during the hot summer months, long before refrigeration made such cooling luxuries available to everyone. The very word sherbet, along with the related word sorbet, descends from the Arabic sharba, a drink, tracing yet another quiet linguistic thread back to this same rich culinary tradition. Dining customs, too, carried real cultural weight, and we already met several chapters ago the musician Zuryab, who is credited with introducing to Andalusian court society the practice of serving meals across a structured sequence of courses, a practice that would eventually, through the long chain of cultural exchange we have followed throughout this whole story, help shape the structured, multi-course dining customs of later European haute cuisine. Hospitality, more broadly, held deep religious and cultural significance across this civilization, with the offering of food and drink to guests, even unexpected or unknown travelers, considered a sacred duty and a source of genuine honor for the host, an ethic of generosity we glimpsed earlier in Zubaydah's wells along the pilgrimage road, now expressed instead around the warmth of a shared table. Rest now, my friend, at that shared table, the scent of rosewater and cardamom still lingering in the warm evening air, dishes passed generously from hand to hand among family and welcome strangers alike. In our next chapter, we will turn to the careful, ongoing modern work of preserving and rediscovering the manuscripts, instruments, and artworks of this whole long civilization, the quiet librarians and conservators who continue, even now, to protect this inheritance for the future. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 33, The Quiet Work of Preservation. Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, let us meet a different kind of hero than the caliphs and scholars we have followed so far, quieter figures, working carefully in climate-controlled rooms and dusty back shelves, dedicating their careers to preserving what remains of this whole long civilization's written and physical inheritance for future generations. We have already touched gently on the tragedy of lost manuscripts, in the Mongol destruction of Baghdad, and in the more recent threats to the Timbuktu libraries. but an enormous amount, remarkably, has survived, scattered now across libraries, museums, and private collections spanning the entire globe. And the ongoing work of finding, cataloging, conserving, and studying these materials continues actively today, in the present moment, even as you rest here listening to this story. The Süleymaniye Library in Istanbul holds tens of thousands of manuscripts gathered from across the Ottoman Empire's vast former territories. The Chester Beatty Library in Dublin, founded on the personal collection of an American-Irish mining magnate with a passion for Islamic and Asian manuscripts, holds an extraordinary collection of beautifully illuminated Quran manuscripts and Persian miniature paintings. The National Library of Egypt in Cairo, the Al-Qarawiyyin Library in Fez, whose collection includes manuscripts dating back over 1,000 years to the university's founding by Fatima al-Fihri, and countless university and private collections across Europe and North America, assembled sometimes through complicated and not always ethically comfortable colonial-era acquisition, all hold fragments of this vast inheritance, and modern scholars continue working, patiently and carefully, to catalog, digitize, and translate these materials, making them increasingly accessible to researchers and curious readers around the world. Digital technology has transformed this preservation work in recent decades, my friend, allowing high-resolution images of fragile, centuries-old manuscripts to be captured and shared freely online, protecting the physical originals from the wear of repeated handling, while simultaneously making their contents available to scholars and interested readers anywhere in the world with an internet connection, a form of open, widely shared access to knowledge that would, I think, have delighted Al-Mamun and his house of wisdom translators, who worked so hard, centuries ago, to gather and share exactly this kind of learning as widely as their own era's technology allowed. Museums, too, play an essential role in this ongoing preservation. The Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, Qatar, designed by the renowned architect I.M. Pei specifically to house and celebrate this civilization's artistic legacy. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's Islamic Art Galleries in New York, the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, all displaying carefully conserved textiles, ceramics, metalwork, and manuscripts, allowing millions of visitors each year to encounter, often for the first time, the extraordinary beauty and sophistication of the civilization we have spent so many chapters exploring together tonight. And importantly, my friend, this preservation work is not simply an act of looking backward with nostalgia. Contemporary scholars continue actively discovering new insights within long-studied manuscripts, applying modern scientific techniques, careful chemical analysis of inks and pigments, high-resolution multispectral imaging capable of revealing text that has faded or been scraped away and written over centuries ago, to extract new information from documents that had already been studied in some cases for well over 100 years. History, it turns out, my friend, is never quite finished being written, even when it concerns events that happened many centuries ago, because our tools for understanding the past keep gently, patiently improving, generation after generation. Rest now, my friend, in the quiet, climate-controlled hush of an archive somewhere in the world, a careful conservator turning the fragile page of an 800-year-old manuscript with gloved hands, photographing it gently, preserving it for readers not yet born. In our next to last chapter, let us step back and consider, quietly and thoughtfully, what it truly was that made this whole long civilization golden in the first place, gathering together the threads we have followed across this entire story. But that is a story for our next telling. Rest, my friend, and I will see you again soon when the story continues. Chapter 34, What Made It Golden. Welcome back, my friend, for our second to last chapter together. Let us rest quietly now and gather up, gently, all the small threads we have followed across this long story, the way a grandmother might gather up scattered balls of yarn at the end of a long evening of knitting, before finally coiling them together softly into one basket. We began beside the round city of Baghdad, its walls rising from riverbank clay, and we watched translators in the house of wisdom carry Greek philosophy and Persian governance and Indian mathematics carefully into Arabic, treating old knowledge as a treasure worth its weight in gold rather than something to discard simply, because it came from outside their own faith or their own people. That single choice, my friend, that willingness to gather wisdom regardless of its source, sits close to the very heart of what made this civilization golden. A civilization confident enough in its own identity to learn eagerly, openly, and without fear from everyone it encountered: Christian translators, Jewish physicians, Persian bureaucrats, Indian mathematicians, Chinese papermakers, all invited in, all valued for what they could contribute. We watched al-Khwarizmi patiently develop algebra, and Ibn al-Haytham insist that claims about light and vision be tested through careful experiment rather than simply argued about in the abstract. And we saw, again and again, a deep, genuine respect for evidence, for careful observation, for the slow, patient correction of even the most respected ancient authorities when direct evidence contradicted them. This spirit of rigorous, evidence-based inquiry, so essential to what we now call the scientific method, did not spring up complete and finished in 16th century Europe, my friend, but grew slowly across centuries, nurtured in observatories in Maragha and hospitals in Baghdad and workshops in Basra, long before it ever reached Galileo or Newton. We watched hospitals in Cairo and Baghdad treat patients with genuine compassion, regardless of their ability to pay. And we watched Zubaydah build wells for pilgrims she would never meet. And we watched Al-Ghazali walk quietly away from prestige and fame in search of something his own considerable intellect alone could not provide. And in each of these moments, my friend, we glimpsed a civilization that took seriously, in 1,000 different quiet ways, its own deep religious teachings about mercy, charity, and the care of strangers, translating abstract spiritual ideals into very concrete, very practical institutions that measurably eased human suffering. We watched paper, cheap and plentiful, spread learning further and faster than the ancient world's fragile parchment ever could, and we watched libraries in Baghdad, Cairo, Fez, and Cordoba open their doors to scholars of every background, and in this we glimpsed a civilization that understood, intuitively and then quite deliberately, that knowledge grows more valuable, not less, the more widely and generously it is shared, an insight that feels, even now, worth carrying gently into our own era of information and learning. And we watched, too, my friend, honestly and without flinching, moments of real darkness alongside all this brightness, conquest and slavery and religious persecution, and the eventual burning of Baghdad's own great libraries, because no civilization in human history, however golden its brightest chapters, has ever been simply and uncomplicatedly good throughout its entire long life. And I did not want to tell you a story that pretended otherwise. The true story, the honest story, is more interesting anyway, my friend. A story of real, flawed, striving human beings, capable of astonishing generosity and astonishing cruelty, sometimes within the very same lifetime, sometimes within the very same ruler's reign, building something remarkable together nonetheless, imperfectly, across many centuries and many different lands. What made this age golden in the end, my friend,